The bell above the door jingled as the wind swept in, signaling a new customer at Ruby's Diner, a small, cozy spot tucked away in a corner of town. Sarah Wells barely looked up from the sizzling skillet in front of her. She had seen countless customers walk in and out of the diner, some in a hurry, some eager to settle into the comfort of the worn leather booths. It was just another day at the diner. But today was different. Jake Matthews, the celebrity, the actor everyone knew but few ever got close to, walked in, right into Sarah's section. He stood by the door for a moment, scanning the room with a look of quiet unease. He wasn't just any famous face, he was a former heartthrob, a household name from hit movies and tabloid covers. Yet, today, his fame seemed more like a heavy weight than a shield. He appeared, tired. The glamour that once seemed to come so easily was now replaced by something far more human. He was just a man who needed a break from the public eye. Sarah noticed him immediately, of course. Who wouldn't? Even if she hadn't recognized him as Jake Matthews from the movies, the aura of stardom was unmistakable. She hadn't paid much attention to his movies, but the buzz surrounding him in the media was unavoidable. As the kitchen lights flickered and the steady hum of the diner continued, she felt a sudden unease, a feeling she couldn't quite explain. "Table for one?" Sarah asked, offering him a warm smile, even though her heart was pounding in her chest. She was used to serving all kinds of customers, but serving a celebrity? That was a first. Jake gave her a nod and, for a moment, a flash of something almost like relief crossed his face. "Yeah, just one," he said quietly. He slid into a booth near the back, far from the bustling kitchen and noisy chatter of the other diners. His eyes flickered around the diner for a moment, his lips set in a thin line. The other patrons hadn't even noticed who he was. Maybe that was the way he liked it today, just another man seeking solace in the simplicity of a diner meal. Sarah grabbed her notepad, trying to keep her composure. She didn't want to seem too starstruck, but it was hard not to when the person sitting in front of her had been in nearly every magazine cover for the past decade. As she walked over to his booth, she felt a wave of nervous energy wash over her. It wasn't like she had never seen famous people before. Her small town wasn't a stranger to the occasional out-of-town celebrity, but no one had ever made her feel quite like this. It was as though there was something behind Jake's blue eyes, a depth of experience she couldn't quite place. "Hi, I'm Sarah, and I'll be your waitress today," she said, her voice a bit shakier than she intended. "Can I get you something to drink?" Jake glanced up at her, meeting her eyes. There was a flicker of something, almost like recognition, but he quickly looked away. "Just water, please." She nodded and turned to head back to the counter. As she grabbed the water jug, she noticed Greg, the diner manager, watching from the back. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, reminding her to stay professional. Greg wasn't the type to take kindly to employees getting too friendly with the customers, especially someone like Jake Matthews. There were rules, unspoken ones. Keep your distance. Don't act like a fan. Just serve the food and keep your head down. But when she returned with Jake's water, something inside her told her to do the opposite. "Anything else I can get for you?" she asked, placing the water down on the table. Jake looked up, and this time, there was something in his gaze. Something weary. "Actually," he began, lowering his voice, "I could use some advice. I know this might sound strange, but I'm not used to quiet. You know. Everywhere I go, it's always loud. People always talking. I don't know what it's like to be left alone." Sarah hesitated, surprised by his honesty. Here he was, Jake Matthews, the golden boy of Hollywood, asking for advice on something so ordinary. Loneliness. Silence. A moment of peace. She took a breath before answering, leaning against the booth casually, as if she had all the time in the world. "I think you get used to it after a while," she said softly, meeting his eyes. "The quiet, I mean. It's not always easy, though. You have to find something to fill it up, or else it gets too heavy. Jake smiled faintly, his lips barely curving upward. And what do you fill it up with? She thought for a moment. Work. People. Family. Whatever keeps you going, I guess. Jake nodded slowly, as if the conversation had given him something to think about. I used to fill it up with work, he said, looking at her with a more focused expression. But now, I'm not so sure. Sarah felt an odd connection in that moment. She was just a waitress, and he was Jake Matthews, but their worlds seemed to overlap in this quiet exchange. She didn't know why, but she wanted to help him. Not because he was a celebrity, but because, for once, it seemed like they both shared something, an understanding of loneliness, a longing for connection. Before she could say anything else, Greg appeared by the table. He had that stern look on his face, the one that told Sarah her moment of connection with Jake was about to end. Is everything okay here? Greg asked, his eyes shifting between her and Jake. Yeah, everything's fine, Jake said, his voice cool now. Just getting some advice from Sarah here. Greg gave Sarah a pointed look. Well, we've got a lot of customers today. Let's keep it moving, all right? Sarah straightened, nodding. Of course. As she walked away, she felt an odd sense of regret. What had she done wrong? Had she crossed some invisible line by speaking with Jake for more than a few minutes? It wasn't like they'd talked about anything personal, but the weight of Greg's disapproval hung in the air like a cloud. As she returned to the kitchen, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Something big was about to happen, and she wasn't sure she was ready for it. But life had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected it. And today, it had just thrown her a fast one. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Sarah Wells wasn't one for dreaming big, not anymore. She used to, back when she was a kid, back when everything seemed possible. But life had a funny way of taking those dreams and twisting them, bending them until they no longer resembled what they once were. Now, Sarah was just trying to get by. At 32, she had seen more than her fair share of struggles. She wasn't born into money. In fact, she came from a family that knew what it meant to hustle, to fight for every little thing they had. Her mom, a single parent herself, worked 2 jobs just to keep the bills paid. Sarah learned early on that you didn't get what you wanted in life without putting in the work, and that meant sacrifice. Her own daughter, Lily, was her biggest source of motivation. At 7 years old, Lily had a spark in her eyes that reminded Sarah of who she used to be. A little girl with big dreams, who believed she could be anything she wanted. But Sarah couldn't afford to let herself dream like that anymore. She had a child to support, and that meant survival. And so, there she was, waiting tables at Ruby's Diner, a job that was more about paying the bills than it was about fulfillment. The regulars all knew her name, and while she wasn't the type to strike up conversations with strangers, she'd often find herself chatting with some of them when they needed a listening ear. It was the only thing that kept the job from feeling like a grind, those little moments of connection. Today, however, her shift had been different. Jake Matthews. The moment he walked into the diner, something shifted inside her, too. It wasn't just because he was famous, though she couldn't deny the way his presence seemed to fill up the space, but because of the sadness she had seen in his eyes. It was like he was looking for something, searching for meaning in a place that wasn't built for finding answers. But that wasn't her problem. She had her own mess to clean up. The drive home after work was always a quiet one. Sarah's old car sputtered along the narrow streets of their small town, its engine barely holding on. It was the kind of car that made you wonder how it still ran, but it got her from point A to point B, and that was all that mattered. When she pulled up to the small apartment she called home, she saw Lily sitting on the front steps, her school backpack beside her. The little girl had been waiting for her, as she often did. It was hard for Sarah to balance work and motherhood, but Lily always seemed to understand. She was an old soul in a young body, wise beyond her years, despite her age. "Hey, Mama," Lily greeted her with a smile that made all the stress of the day fade away. "Hey, sweetie," Sarah replied, her voice softening. "How was school?" "Okay. Just the usual." Lily shrugged, her long brown hair falling over her shoulder. She had her mother's eyes, big and brown, always searching for something more. Sarah picked up Lily's backpack and led her inside. The apartment was small, but it was theirs. The walls were lined with family photos, Sarah's mom, her grandmother, and a few childhood pictures of Sarah herself. The kitchen was tucked in a corner, and the living room had a mismatched couch that had seen better days. It wasn't perfect, but it was home. Sarah had come a long way since her own childhood, but she still hadn't quite made it to where she wanted to be. She was still stuck in the cycle of working just to keep afloat. After dinner, Lily ran off to her room, leaving Sarah to finish the dishes. Her mind drifted back to the diner. What had Jake been thinking? Why had he come into the diner, of all places? It was rare for celebrities to come to small towns like theirs. It made her wonder if he was really looking for something, or maybe someone. The thought stayed with her long after she went to bed. It wasn't that she cared about Jake Matthews. At least, that's what she kept telling herself. He was just another customer, right? Another face in the crowd. But there was something about their conversation, about his quiet request for advice, that felt personal. Too personal for a simple encounter in a diner. The next morning, Sarah woke up early to get Lily ready for school. After breakfast, she kissed her daughter goodbye and sent her off with a promise to be at the school play later in the week. It was one of the few things Sarah always tried not to miss. Lily was her world, and Sarah would do anything to make sure her daughter knew she was loved. The rest of the day passed in a blur of orders, coffee refills, and the constant shuffle of the diner's daily rhythm. But by the time Sarah's shift ended, she couldn't help but feel the weight of her earlier conversation with Jake. Had she crossed a line by being so personal? Was he just looking for someone to talk to? Or had something more been there, something she didn't fully understand? She glanced at the clock as she grabbed her things and headed out the door. It was nearly closing time, and Sarah had hoped to get a quick coffee before heading home. That was when she saw Jake Matthews again. This time, it wasn't a chance encounter. He was standing by the door, waiting for her. "Sarah, right?" Jake's voice was quiet, almost hesitant, as he took a step toward her. I just wanted to say, thanks. For listening yesterday. It really helped." Sarah froze. What was he doing here? "Jake," she stammered, not sure what to say. "You don't have to." "I do," he interrupted, offering a small, genuine smile. "I know this sounds strange, but it's hard to find people who really listen, you know. And you," he paused, looking at her with a sincerity that made her heart skip a beat, "you didn't treat me like some celebrity. You treated me like a normal guy." Sarah blinked, unsure how to respond. Her mind raced. Why was he still here? Was he trying to make up for something? Or was there more to this than just a fleeting moment? "I'm just doing my job," Sarah finally said, her voice steady, though her pulse quickened. "I'm glad I could help." Jake nodded, but there was something in his eyes, a depth she couldn't quite place. He held out a small envelope. I know it's not much, but I wanted to give you something. I know what it's like to struggle, to feel stuck. If you ever need anything. I mean it. Anything." She took the envelope, feeling her heart race. Was this a tip? Or something else? "I'll think about it," she said quietly, still unsure of how to react. And with that, Jake turned and left, disappearing into the night. As Sarah stood there, holding the envelope, she felt a strange mixture of confusion and curiosity. What had just happened? Was this really just about kindness? Or was there something more, something she hadn't yet figured out? One thing was clear, her life was about to change in ways she never expected. The next few days passed in a blur for Sarah. The world seemed to continue turning while she tried to make sense of what had happened at Ruby's diner. Jake Matthews had walked into her life for a brief moment, and now, it felt like he was lingering in her mind, in a place she hadn't expected. She hadn't opened the envelope yet, it was still sitting on the counter, untouched. She didn't know why, but something about it didn't feel right. She had convinced herself that maybe it was just a tip, a gesture of kindness, but then again, why would someone like Jake Matthews want to help her? Her life was simple. It wasn't glamorous, nor did she expect it to be. She worked hard, took care of Lily, and did her best to make ends meet. That was enough. She didn't need anyone's charity, especially not from someone like Jake, someone who had more than he could ever spend. But the nagging curiosity wouldn't go away. She kept wondering what could be in that envelope. What did he mean by, "if you ever need anything"? The words had lingered with her, haunting her more than she cared to admit. Was it an offer to change her life? Or was it just another empty gesture from a celebrity trying to clear his conscience? Sarah knew she was overthinking it, but that didn't make the questions disappear. Life had taught her to be cautious, not to expect much from anyone, especially those who had everything. She had seen enough people come and go, offering false promises and empty smiles. Trusting anyone, even for a moment, was a luxury she couldn't afford. Still, she couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in her chest. The day after Jake had left the diner, Sarah found herself standing in front of the counter, staring at the small envelope he had given her. She hadn't touched it all day. And now, it was calling her. With a sigh, she picked it up. The smooth, slightly heavy paper felt odd in her hands. There was no name on it, no return address, just a simple note that read, "For Sarah." No strings attached. She opened it slowly, revealing a check inside. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the amount, $5,000. Sarah blinked, not quite believing her eyes. She pulled the check out of the envelope and stared at it, almost afraid to touch it. $5,000. It wasn't just a tip. This was far more than that. She placed the check back down, her hands trembling. This wasn't just about money, it was the implication behind it. Jake Matthews, the actor she had served at Ruby's diner, had given her a substantial sum of money with no explanation, no strings attached. It didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. She barely knew the man. They had exchanged a few words, shared a moment of quiet conversation. Why would he do this? Her mind raced with the possibilities. Was this some kind of charity? Or was he offering her help out of some misplaced sense of guilt? Maybe he thought she needed it, that her life was harder than it seemed. But who was he to decide that? A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Sarah blinked, looking toward the small window beside the door. She wasn't expecting anyone. Hesitantly, she walked over and opened it to find Greg, the manager of Ruby's diner, standing there, holding a takeout bag in his hands. "Hey, Sarah," he said, his voice a little quieter than usual. "Just wanted to check in. You okay?" She looked at him, still holding the envelope in her hand. She wasn't sure how much to reveal, especially since the last few days had been so strange. Greg had always been kind to her, though his managerial style was more about keeping things businesslike than personal. Still, he had always treated her fairly, and she respected him for that. "Yeah, I'm fine," she replied, her voice shaky. I don't know. A lot's been on my mind." Greg's eyes narrowed slightly. He stepped inside, placing the bag on the small kitchen counter. "You sure? Because you've been a little off lately. And I noticed you've been quiet at work." I'm just thinking about some stuff, Sarah said, glancing down at the check again. Some stuff that's unexpected. Greg raised an eyebrow, then followed her gaze to the check on the counter. His expression shifted to something like curiosity, but he didn't ask further. Instead, he just nodded slowly, like he already knew the answer. You're thinking about Jake Matthews, aren't you? Sarah froze. She hadn't said anything to Greg about Jake, not even a word. How could he know? I saw you two talking the other day, Greg continued, his tone matter-of-fact. You've got a look in your eyes that says you're still trying to figure out what happened. Let me guess, you're not used to someone like him paying attention to you, huh? She hesitated, then finally spoke. I'm just confused. He gave me this. She motioned toward the check on the counter. $5,000. No explanation. No reason. Just a check. And I don't know why. Greg looked at the check, then at her. He seemed to weigh the situation carefully before offering his thoughts. Sarah, you've been working at Ruby's for a while now. You're one of the hardest workers I've seen, and I know you're not the type to just accept charity. But let me tell you something. People like Jake Matthews, they don't give that kind of money unless they feel something. Maybe he saw something in you. Maybe he saw you for who you really are, not just as some waitress in a diner. Sarah shook her head. But why me? There are plenty of people out there who need it more than I do. Maybe, Greg said, his voice softer now, but sometimes people need help in ways they don't realize. Maybe he's giving you a chance to do something more. Maybe it's his way of showing you that your future doesn't have to look like this. Sarah bit her lip, her mind whirling with thoughts she couldn't quite make sense of. Jake Matthews, a man she barely knew, was offering her something that could change everything. She didn't know if she was ready for it, but something inside her was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was her chance to make a change. Before she could respond, Greg spoke again. I think you should at least hear him out, Sarah. You never know what might come of it. His words hung in the air, and Sarah couldn't help but wonder if Greg was right. Maybe Jake wasn't just offering money, maybe he was offering something more. A chance. A future she hadn't even dared to dream about. The decision was hers to make. And in that moment, she realized that whatever she chose, it would change everything. The days following Jake Matthews' mysterious gift were a blur. Sarah couldn't escape the growing uncertainty that swirled around her. She had spent countless hours thinking about that check, about what it could mean, and why Jake had chosen her. It felt like something out of a movie, a celebrity coming into her life with the potential to change everything. But in the back of her mind, Sarah couldn't help but wonder, was this really a chance, or was it just another twist of fate that would lead her down a path she wasn't ready for? Lily had noticed the change in her mother. There was an almost imperceptible shift in Sarah's demeanor, as if she were carrying an invisible weight. It wasn't like her to be distracted, to be lost in her thoughts, but lately, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Something big. That afternoon, after dropping Lily off at her friend's house, Sarah decided to finally open the envelope. She had stared at it for long enough. It was time to face the reality of what was inside. The check still lay there, untouched, on the kitchen counter. As she reached for it again, her hands were trembling. She could hear her heart pounding in her chest, each beat like a countdown to something unknown. As she unfolded the check and stared at the five-figure sum once more, Sarah's mind wandered. She could do a lot with this money. Pay off some bills, maybe get a nicer place to live, or even take Lily somewhere special. It was the kind of money she hadn't dreamed of seeing in years, but it wasn't just the money that had her stumped. It was Jake. Why did he do this? What did he expect in return? The phone rang, cutting through her thoughts like a sharp knife. Sarah jumped, her heart racing again. She glanced at the caller ID. It was an unfamiliar number, but for some reason, she couldn't ignore it. "Hello." Sarah answered, her voice cautious. "Is this Sarah Wells?" The voice on the other end was familiar, yet she couldn't quite place it. "Yes, this is her," Sarah replied, slightly unsure. "This is Jake Matthews." The voice was calm, but there was an urgency in his tone that made Sarah's stomach drop. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I know this is all very strange, but I wanted to talk to you. In person. About everything." Sarah's breath hitched. Jake Matthews. The actor who had given her the check, the one who had been on her mind for days. Why was he calling her now? Okay, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "What's this about? I know this is sudden, and I get that you probably have a lot of questions. I can explain everything, but I'd like to do it face to face. Would you be willing to meet me tomorrow? I'll make sure it's somewhere comfortable for you. Just think about it, okay?" Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Meet him? She hadn't expected this, but at the same time, she couldn't say no. What could this mean? What kind of person would he be in person? "I don't know, Jake," she trailed off, unsure. But before she could finish, he interrupted her. "Look, I get it. This is a lot to take in. But please, I promise you, there's no trick. I'm not here to make your life harder. If anything, I want to help. Just one conversation, and you can decide for yourself whether you want to walk away or take a chance." There was something in his voice, something earnest, that made Sarah hesitate. She wasn't naive. She had lived through enough to recognize when someone was trying to manipulate her. But she also knew when someone was being genuine. "Okay," she said finally, her voice soft but resolute. "Where and when?" "I'll text you the details," Jake replied quickly. "And thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate it." She hung up the phone, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She wasn't sure what she was getting herself into, but she knew one thing, she couldn't turn back now. She had made her decision. As she stood there, holding the phone, Sarah's thoughts flickered to her daughter, Lily. What would she think if she found out? Sarah knew that whatever was coming next, it had the potential to change everything. But was she ready for it? Could she really trust Jake Matthews? The man who had walked into her life like a whirlwind and dropped a bombshell of an offer in her lap. The next morning, Sarah found herself pacing the living room, nervously waiting for Jake's text. She had no idea what to expect, but part of her couldn't help but wonder if this was some kind of test. Would this conversation with Jake change the course of her life? Would it give her the kind of opportunity she had always dreamed of? At that moment, the text came through. It was short and simple, but the instructions were clear. "Meet me at the Maple Cafe at 2 p.m. I'll be waiting. Jake." Sarah looked at the message and took a deep breath. It was time. She had no idea where this would lead, but she knew she had to show up. She had to take the first step, even if she didn't know what that step meant. The Maple Cafe was a cozy little cafe on the outskirts of town, a place where locals went for coffee and quiet conversation. It was exactly the kind of place where someone like Sarah could feel comfortable. She had passed by it countless times but never really thought about stopping in. Today, however, it would be different. As Sarah drove to the cafe, her nerves were on edge. She had dressed casually, but still felt out of place. The cafe was warm, with soft lighting and the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee in the air. There were a few people scattered about, but she immediately noticed Jake sitting at a corner table. He was alone, his phone resting on the table in front of him, and he seemed focused, almost waiting for her to arrive. She hesitated for a moment at the door, then stepped inside. The sound of the bell above the door caught his attention, and when he saw her, a small, welcoming smile spread across his face. It wasn't the kind of smile that seemed rehearsed or insincere. It was genuine. "Sarah," he greeted her, standing up and offering a hand. Thank you for coming. She hesitated for a moment, then shook his hand. There was an electricity in the air that she couldn't quite explain. Sure, Sarah replied, trying to sound calm. You said you wanted to talk. Jake motioned for her to sit. Yeah, I think we need to. I know this is all unexpected, but I just want to explain why I reached out. Sarah sat down, still unsure of what she was about to hear. Jake took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers. I don't know how to start this, but I'll just say it. I saw something in you, Sarah. Something real. And I wanted to offer you a chance to change your life. No gimmicks. No strings attached. Her heart raced again. What was he saying? What did he mean by the chance? The air between them felt thick with unspoken words, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a twinge of nervousness as she settled into the booth across from Jake. She wasn't sure what to expect from this meeting, but her mind was racing. Was he about to tell her this was some kind of charity? A publicity stunt? Or was there something deeper, something more meaningful behind his actions? Jake seemed to be carefully weighing his words, almost like he was trying to figure out the best way to break the news to her. The moment stretched longer than Sarah was comfortable with, and she shifted in her seat, her fingers tapping nervously against the mug in front of her. After a long pause, Jake finally spoke, his voice steady but filled with sincerity. First of all, I want to say that I'm not here to make you uncomfortable, Sarah, he began. I know this all probably feels a bit out of the blue, and I understand if you're skeptical. But I need you to know that I wasn't trying to do something nice out of some sense of guilt or obligation. I'm doing this because I believe you deserve more than what life has given you. Sarah blinked, taken aback by his words. She had expected a typical, rehearsed response, something about how he admired her strength or was looking for a way to help, but this? This was different. I don't know what to say, she murmured, her mind still racing. You don't even know me. How can you know what I deserve? Jake nodded thoughtfully, his eyes searching hers as though he was trying to gauge her reaction. That's true, he admitted. I don't know you as well as I'd like. But I've seen you. I've watched how you work, how you carry yourself, how you care for your daughter. And I can tell that you've been through a lot. More than you probably let on. He paused, almost as if he was waiting for her to interrupt, but she didn't. She was too stunned by his perception, by how much he seemed to understand her life even though they had barely exchanged a few words. There's something about you, Sarah, Jake continued, his voice quieter now. You don't settle. You don't complain. You just keep going. I admire that. It's rare. Her heart squeezed in her chest. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words, how much she longed for someone to acknowledge her strength, even in the smallest way. Jake leaned forward, his eyes intense but warm. That's why I want to offer you a real opportunity. A chance to do something more than just survive. To thrive. Sarah's brow furrowed. What kind of opportunity? Jake's lips curled into a small smile, one that was both confident and reassuring. I'm not just talking about money. I'm talking about the possibility of something bigger. You've been stuck in the same routine for years, right? Taking care of Lily, working at the diner, paying the bills, and barely getting by. But you're capable of so much more than that. You deserve a life where you don't have to struggle every day, where you don't have to worry about the next paycheck. And I think I can help you get there. Sarah's mind was spinning. She didn't know how to respond. A part of her wanted to push back, to tell him that she didn't need his help, that she had done just fine on her own. But another part of her, the part that had spent years dreaming of a better life, was starting to listen. Maybe this wasn't just a pipe dream. Maybe Jake wasn't offering her charity, maybe he was offering a chance to change her future. What kind of help are we talking about here? Sarah asked cautiously, her voice steady despite the whirlpool of emotions building inside her. Jake took a deep breath, as though bracing himself for the weight of what he was about to say. "I'm offering you a place on my team. I've got an entertainment project coming up, and I need someone who can think outside the box, someone with heart, someone who knows what it means to fight for something. I'm not looking for an assistant or a publicist, I'm looking for someone who can contribute to the creative process, who has fresh ideas, who can make a difference." Sarah's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. This was far beyond what she had imagined. A part of her couldn't believe it. An opportunity like this was a dream come true for someone like her. But another part of her recoiled. Was she really ready to leave everything behind? To jump into something so uncertain, so risky? "Wait," she said, holding up a hand. "You want me to work for you? In entertainment? But I'm not. I don't know anything about that world. I don't have any experience. I'm just a waitress." Jake smiled gently, shaking his head. "That's exactly why I think you'd be perfect for this. You're not jaded by the industry. You don't have the same limitations or expectations that people who've been in the business for years do. You have a raw, unfiltered perspective, and that's what I need. Plus, I can teach you everything you need to know. I believe in your potential, Sarah." She was speechless, her thoughts swirling around in a way she couldn't quite control. The idea of working in entertainment had never crossed her mind, not seriously, at least. But here it was, being handed to her on a silver platter. This wasn't just a job offer, it was a chance to change her life completely. Sarah couldn't help but laugh, though it was a nervous, almost disbelieving laugh. "You really think I can do this?" "I know you can," Jake said without hesitation, his gaze unwavering. "You've got something special. And I think you need to see that for yourself." Sarah stared at him, 1,000 thoughts running through her head. Her life was simple, but it had been hard. She had always put others first, always taken care of Lily, and always kept her dreams buried deep inside. But here was someone offering her a chance to make those dreams real. To do something she had never thought possible. "What if I fail?" she asked, her voice a whisper. Jake's eyes softened, and he reached across the table, gently touching her hand. "You won't. And if you do, I'll be right there to help you get back up." His words were like a lifeline thrown to her, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah allowed herself to hope. The possibility of a new beginning felt so distant just a few days ago, but now it was standing right in front of her, offering her the chance to step into a life she had only ever dreamed of. She exhaled slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. The road ahead was uncertain, but maybe that was exactly what she needed. Maybe it was time to stop surviving and start living. "I'm in," she said, the words coming out with more conviction than she had expected. "I'll take the chance." Jake's smile widened, his eyes lighting up with approval. "I knew you would. Welcome to the team, Sarah." The next few days after Sarah's decision felt like a whirlwind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the path ahead of her, a path she had never imagined for herself. She had taken the first step, and now, there was no turning back. The life she had been living, the routine that had defined her for so long, was about to shift in ways she couldn't even begin to understand. The following morning, Sarah woke up early, her nerves already humming with excitement and fear. She still couldn't believe what had just happened. She had agreed to join Jake Matthews in his creative project, something that had the potential to turn her life upside down. The weight of the decision pressed on her chest, but there was also something else, an exhilarating sense of possibility. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was standing on the edge of something that could change everything. As she looked out the window at the morning sun streaming through the trees, Sarah felt a rush of emotions. Part of her still felt like she was walking into the unknown, unsure of what to expect. But another part of her, the part that had always believed in the power of possibility, was ready to face whatever came next. The phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her reverie. She pulled it out and saw a text from Jake. We're meeting at 10 a.m. today to discuss the project. Don't worry, I'll walk you through everything. Let's get this started. Her heart skipped a beat. This was it. The beginning of something real. After a quick breakfast and a hurried call to Lily's school to confirm she would be home with a sitter for the day, Sarah made her way to the meeting. The butterflies in her stomach felt like they were fluttering non-stop, but she didn't let that stop her. She couldn't afford to hesitate now. She had made a decision, and now she had to follow through. The meeting was set to take place at a trendy coffee shop in the city, one of Jake's favorite spots. When Sarah arrived, she could already see Jake sitting at a table by the window, his ever-present calm demeanor making him look completely at ease in a world that often seemed chaotic. He looked up as she walked in, and that reassuring smile of his melted some of the tension in her chest. "Sarah, you made it." Jake greeted her with warmth, standing to offer her a seat. "Thanks for the invitation," Sarah replied, settling into the chair across from him. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was in a completely different world now, one that was more polished and professional than the diner she was used to. But she pushed the nerves aside. This was her chance. Jake didn't waste any time. "So, here's the deal," he began, leaning forward, his voice filled with purpose. "I'm working on a new project. It's an entertainment initiative, kind of a mix between an influencer-driven platform and real-world storytelling. It's bold, it's unique, and I think it could really make an impact. What I need from you is your perspective, your insight, your ideas, your creativity. I want someone who's been outside the industry, who sees things differently. And that's you." Sarah listened intently, trying to take in every word. She had no experience with anything even remotely close to this world, but the more Jake spoke, the more intrigued she became. This wasn't just some corporate gig. This was a chance to build something from the ground up. And it was all based on his belief in her potential. "I don't know if I'm the right person for this," Sarah admitted, though her voice was steadier than she had expected. "I've never worked in entertainment, and I don't have connections. I don't know if I have what it takes." Jake smiled, his eyes twinkling with confidence. "That's the beauty of it. You don't need connections. You don't need experience. You have something far more important: authenticity. You've been through things that most people can't even imagine, and that gives you a perspective that's rare. I'm not looking for someone to follow orders. I'm looking for someone who will bring something new to the table." Sarah nodded slowly. He had a point. Maybe the lack of experience was an asset, not a disadvantage. She had spent her whole life working to survive, but now she had an opportunity to create something meaningful, to be a part of something bigger than herself. "All right," Sarah said, her voice firmer now. "I'm in. Tell me more about what I'll be doing." Jake's grin widened. "That's what I like to hear. First things first, you'll be helping to shape the content. We'll be working with influencers, creating stories, and finding unique ways to connect with people. But it's not just about being on camera or managing social media. I want your input on everything: how we can tell a story that feels real, that resonates with people. You'll be working directly with me, and I'll make sure you're trained in everything you need to know." It sounded like a dream, but Sarah wasn't naive. She knew it wouldn't be easy. She would have to work hard, learn fast, and prove herself in an industry she had no idea how to navigate. But for the first time in years, she felt excited about the future. She could already see the potential, the possibilities. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to take on the challenge. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady now. "Let's do this." Jake's eyes sparkled with approval. "I knew I could count on you, Sarah. This is just the beginning." The rest of the meeting was spent going over the details, setting timelines, and discussing the initial steps Sarah would need to take. She was overwhelmed but also energized. This was real. It was happening. By the time she left the coffee shop, Sarah felt like a different person. The familiar weight of doubt and fear had lifted, replaced by a sense of purpose. She was going to make this work. Not just for herself, but for Lily, for their future. She had made a decision, and now she was going to take the reins of her life. As she walked back to her car, Sarah couldn't help but smile. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like an adventure. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. The first few weeks after Sarah joined Jake's project felt like a blur. She quickly found herself thrown into a whirlwind of meetings, brainstorming sessions, and long hours learning the ropes of the entertainment industry. Every day was a new challenge, and Sarah knew she had a long road ahead of her if she was going to make this work. But as overwhelmed as she sometimes felt, she also felt something else, a spark of excitement. For the first time in a long time, she was doing something that made her feel alive. Jake was a patient mentor. He never rushed her, always explaining the ins and outs of the business, giving her time to ask questions and process information. He never made her feel small or inexperienced. If anything, he treated her like an equal from the start, a gesture that helped Sarah find her confidence in an industry that often felt like it was reserved for people who had the right connections or pedigree. But there was still a voice in the back of her mind that told her she wasn't good enough. It was that familiar nagging feeling, the one that had always followed her, especially when things were going well. Sarah had never truly allowed herself to believe she could have it all. Success, happiness, a life that wasn't defined by constant struggle. It was as if she was waiting for something to go wrong, for the other shoe to drop. One morning, Jake called her into his office. Sarah had been working on content ideas for the project, but this was the first time he had asked her to come into his personal workspace. It was a sleek, modern office with glass walls that looked out over the city. The view was breathtaking, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a rush of awe as she stepped inside. She had never been in a space like this, everything about it screamed success. Jake was sitting behind his desk, scribbling notes on a pad of paper. When he saw her enter, he gave her a warm smile. "Come in, Sarah. I wanted to talk to you about something important." She raised an eyebrow, feeling the slight flutter in her chest. "What's up?" Jake gestured for her to sit down across from him. "I've been impressed with how quickly you've adapted to everything. You've got great ideas, and you've been diving into the work with full energy. But now, I want to see if you're ready for the next step." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. Was he going to tell her it wasn't working out? That she wasn't ready for more responsibility? Jake continued, unaware of her thoughts. "I think it's time for you to start leading some of the content creation. We're working on a few big campaigns, and I want you to take the reins on one of them. You'll be working with a small team of influencers, setting the direction for the content, and making sure everything stays aligned with the project's goals." Sarah's eyes widened. Led a campaign? She wasn't sure she was ready for that. She had no formal experience in the entertainment industry. The thought of taking charge felt like it came with an overwhelming amount of responsibility. What if she messed up? What if she failed? But as she glanced at Jake, she saw the quiet confidence in his eyes, and that nagging voice in her head told her she had to at least try. She couldn't keep second-guessing herself forever. I don't know if I'm ready for something like that," Sarah admitted, her voice softer than she intended. "This is a big deal. What if I mess up?" Jake leaned forward, his expression serious but encouraging. "Sarah, that's the point. You're never going to be 100% ready for anything. But you've got something that others don't, fresh ideas, an understanding of what real people want to see. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be brave enough to take the leap." His words were a push in the right direction, but Sarah still felt the fear creeping in. However, something in her shifted. She had always played it safe, always let the fear of failure control her decisions. Maybe this time, it was time to do things differently. Maybe it was time to take the risk. "I'll do it," she said, the words slipping out before she could think about them too much. I'll take the lead. Jake smiled, his eyes lighting up with approval. That's what I like to hear. You'll have my full support every step of the way, but I know you can do this. As Sarah left Jake's office, her heart was pounding in her chest. She was both terrified and exhilarated. She had just committed to something huge, and now the pressure was on. There was no turning back, but somehow, she felt more alive than she had in years. The first few days after the meeting felt like a blur. Sarah spent long hours researching the influencers she would be working with, developing ideas, and drafting content. She felt like a fish out of water, but she also felt something stirring inside her, a sense of determination she hadn't known she had. She wasn't the type to quit, not when things got tough. She had always been the one to fight through the challenges, to push past the barriers, no matter how many times she had fallen. This wasn't any different. She wasn't going to let her doubts control her. She was going to rise to the occasion. But the more she worked on the project, the more she realized how much she still had to learn. There were moments when she felt overwhelmed, when the weight of responsibility felt too heavy to bear. She would lie awake at night, her mind racing with questions. Was she really the right person for this job? Did she even belong in this world? And then there was Lily. Every time Sarah would head out for a meeting or a brainstorming session, she would miss her daughter's smile, her infectious energy. It wasn't easy balancing everything, work, family, and the pressure of a new job. But Sarah had made a commitment. And she wasn't going to let her family down. One evening, as Sarah sat at her kitchen table, going over some last-minute details for the campaign, she felt the familiar tug of guilt. She hadn't been spending as much time with Lily as she would have liked. Her daughter was getting older, and every moment she wasn't there felt like time slipping away. But the phone buzzed, snapping Sarah out of her thoughts. It was Jake. How's everything going? Need any help? Sarah stared at the message for a moment. She had already worked through countless obstacles on her own, but this time, she was willing to admit that she needed support. She was standing at the edge of something incredible, but she couldn't do it all alone. She quickly typed back, I could use a little guidance. But I'm making progress. Thanks for checking in. His response came almost immediately, you've got this. Don't forget, if you need help, I'm just a call away. The reassurance was exactly what Sarah needed to hear. She wasn't alone in this journey, and maybe, just maybe, she could truly succeed. Sarah woke up early, the sunlight filtering through her bedroom curtains and warming her skin. She had been waking up earlier these past few days, her mind constantly racing with ideas and plans for the project. She couldn't afford to let her guard down, every moment was precious as she tried to balance her new responsibilities with her life at home. She felt a bit more confident in her role now, but that didn't mean it was easy. Leading a campaign was no small feat. There were a million moving parts, coordinating with influencers, refining content ideas, overseeing production details. But Sarah was managing, despite the pressure. She was beginning to learn how to juggle it all. Lily had just started school again after the holidays, and Sarah tried to make the most of their mornings together. But with her focus on the project, the time she spent with her daughter was growing shorter. Guilt gnawed at her. She had promised herself that no matter what, Lily would always come first. But now, as Sarah took a deep breath and glanced at her phone, she realized she had already missed a call from the school. Her heart skipped a beat. She quickly dialed back, her stomach tightening with each ring. Hello, this is Sarah Thompson, I missed a call from the school. Hi, Sarah, this is Mrs. Carter. I'm calling to let you know that Lily has been feeling a bit under the weather today. She's not running a fever, but she's saying she's tired and has a slight headache. We think it might be best if she went home for the rest of the day. Sarah's heart sank. She hated the thought of Lily being sick, especially when she was busy trying to build something for their future. But being a mother always came first. I'll pick her up right away. Thank you for letting me know, Sarah replied, already moving toward the door. By the time Sarah arrived at the school, Lily was sitting in the nurse's office, clutching her backpack and looking a bit pale. When she saw Sarah, her eyes brightened, and a small smile spread across her face. "Hi, Mom," Lily said quietly, her voice soft from the exhaustion she must have been feeling. "I think I'm okay now, but I don't feel so great." Sarah crouched down beside her, brushing her daughter's hair away from her face. "Don't worry, sweetheart. We'll get you home, and I'll make you your favorite soup. You can rest, and we'll take it easy today, okay?" Lily nodded, and Sarah helped her into her coat. The drive home was quiet, with only the soft hum of the car filling the space between them. As Sarah glanced over at Lily, she couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. She had been so wrapped up in her work that she hadn't even noticed when Lily started feeling sick. It was moments like this that made her question whether she was doing the right thing by taking on such a big responsibility. Once they were home, Sarah made sure Lily got comfortable on the couch with her blanket and a warm cup of tea. She set her laptop down beside her, figuring she could work while Lily rested. But it wasn't long before a message from Jake popped up on her screen. "How's everything going? Do you need help with anything today?" Sarah hesitated for a moment before typing back, her fingers moving quickly as she responded. "I'm fine. Just a little distracted today. Lily's home sick, but I'm managing." The message wasn't entirely truthful, but it felt easier to send. She didn't want to seem weak or unable to handle the responsibility. After all, Jake was relying on her to take charge of this project, and she didn't want to let him, or herself, down. She glanced at Lily, who had dozed off on the couch, her head resting against the pillow. It was in these quiet moments, when everything else seemed to slow down, that Sarah's mind would wander. She found herself torn between two worlds, the ambitious career she was building and the daughter she had vowed to protect and raise with love and care. Just as Sarah was about to dive back into her work, her phone rang again. This time, it was from one of the influencers she was coordinating with for the campaign. Sarah picked up, hoping the conversation wouldn't take too long. "Hey, Sarah, we've got a bit of an issue on our end. The content you approved, some of the footage doesn't line up with what we discussed. We're going to need to redo part of it, and it's going to push our timeline back by at least a couple of days," the influencer said, her voice tight with frustration. Sarah's stomach dropped. A delay would set them back significantly. She had been pushing to stay on schedule, not wanting to lose momentum, but now it seemed like her efforts were being undone by a mistake outside her control. "Okay," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Let's figure out the best way to move forward. Can you send me the revised footage by tomorrow morning so I can review it?" "I'll try my best. We'll send it as soon as possible," the influencer replied before hanging up. Sarah sat back in her chair, feeling the weight of the setback press against her chest. It wasn't just the project, she was beginning to realize she was stretched thinner than ever before. Between Lily being sick and the delay in the campaign, it felt like she was on the verge of losing control. How could she keep this up? How could she juggle her responsibilities at home and at work without letting something slip? Her phone buzzed again, and she immediately groaned, anticipating another issue. But it wasn't from Jake, it was from Lily's school. The principal was calling now. "Hello. Hi, Sarah, this is Mr. Harris, the principal. I wanted to follow up regarding Lily's illness today. We've noticed that she's had some absences recently, and we're just checking in to make sure everything is okay. If there's anything we can do to support her, please don't hesitate to reach out." Sarah felt a sudden surge of panic. Absences? Of course, Lily had missed school in the past, but she hadn't realized how much it might be adding up. How was she supposed to be the perfect mother, the perfect employee, the perfect everything, when she was falling behind on both fronts? "I'm doing my best," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "She's been struggling with a lot lately. I'll make sure she gets caught up. Thank you for checking in. After hanging up, Sarah took a deep breath. It felt like the world was closing in around her. She was losing control. The weight of her responsibilities felt heavier than ever before. But just as Sarah was about to spiral into self-doubt, she looked at Lily, still sleeping soundly, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been for weeks. Despite the setbacks, despite the challenges, Sarah knew one thing for certain. She couldn't give up. Not now. Not when Lily needed her. With a renewed sense of resolve, Sarah sat up straighter. She had to find a way to manage this, she had to. It was her only choice. It was the third consecutive sleepless night Sarah had endured. Her eyes were heavy, her mind cluttered with to-do lists, project revisions, and missed moments with Lily. She could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her every waking moment. Despite the whirlwind of activity around her, Sarah felt like she was standing still in quicksand. The harder she worked, the deeper she sank. That morning, Sarah dropped Lily off at school, her daughter's soft smile still etched in her mind. Lily had seemed better, and for the first time in a few days, Sarah felt a brief moment of peace. But even that peace was fleeting. Her phone buzzed as soon as she stepped out of the car, and a message from Jake immediately pulled her back into the chaos. "Hey Sarah, got a few updates. We need to make some changes to the campaign schedule. Let's talk later today about what we can do to stay on track." The message, though routine in tone, set Sarah's heart racing. Another setback. Another obstacle to navigate. She could feel the stress creeping up her spine, tightening with every word. She was barely keeping everything together as it was, and now it seemed like things were falling apart faster than she could handle. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The last thing she wanted was to break down in front of Jake, or anyone for that matter. But how much longer could she keep pretending everything was okay? She wasn't sure anymore. The day was filled with constant calls, emails, and meetings. At first, Sarah tried to maintain her usual sense of optimism, but the cracks were starting to show. It felt like every time she made one decision, two new problems emerged. The influencers she was coordinating with weren't meeting deadlines. The footage that was supposed to be finalized still wasn't up to par. And the project schedule was slipping further and further away from the original plan. By the time Sarah finally made her way into Jake's office for their scheduled meeting that afternoon, she was physically and emotionally drained. Her eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, and her shoulders were tense with the weight of everything she was trying to manage. Jake looked up as she entered, his expression warm but with a hint of concern. He motioned for her to sit down. "How's everything going, Sarah? You look like you could use a break." Sarah sat across from him, trying to hide the exhaustion that was taking over her body. She forced a smile, but it felt brittle. "It's fine, Jake. Just a few bumps in the road with the campaign, but nothing we can't fix." Jake didn't seem convinced. He leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. "You know, you don't have to do all of this alone. I know you're used to handling things yourself, but this is a team effort. We're all in this together." His words felt like a lifeline, but they also triggered a surge of frustration inside Sarah. She had been so focused on proving herself, on showing that she could handle everything, that she hadn't realized how much she had been isolating herself. She wasn't used to asking for help, especially not when things were falling apart. "I don't know what to do anymore," Sarah said, her voice trembling. It was the first time she had allowed herself to admit just how overwhelmed she was. "I'm juggling too many things, Jake. The project, Lily's health, my responsibilities at home, it's too much. I don't know how to keep up." Jake was silent for a moment, watching her carefully. Then, he leaned forward and spoke in a tone that was both gentle and firm. "Sarah, it's okay to admit when you're struggling. This isn't about being perfect. It's about doing your best, and sometimes that means leaning on others. I'm here to help you, and I don't want to see you burn out. You're doing incredible work, but you don't have to do it all by yourself. Sarah blinked, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. It wasn't just about the project for him. It was about her well-being. And for the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe. Jake was offering her an out, not just from the pressure of the project, but from the pressure she had placed on herself. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered, her voice breaking. I feel like I'm failing at everything. Jake didn't hesitate. You're not failing, Sarah. You're human. And sometimes, being human means you need support. You don't have to do everything alone. Let me help you. Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes as she tried to hold herself together. She had spent so long trying to keep up the appearance of being strong and capable. But in this moment, with Jake's words weighing on her, she realized that strength didn't always mean pushing through. Sometimes, it meant asking for help. I've been so focused on making everything work that I forgot what matters most, Sarah said, her voice shaky. Lily, my health, my happiness. I've been so caught up in proving myself that I didn't see how far off course I was. Jake nodded, understanding. It's easy to lose sight of what matters when you're caught up in a project or a goal. But you're doing great, Sarah. Take a step back if you need to. I'm here for you, and we'll figure this out together. That evening, after her conversation with Jake, Sarah returned home with a different perspective. The house felt quieter than usual, and Lily was already curled up on the couch, watching her favorite show. Seeing her daughter so peaceful made Sarah realize how much she had been neglecting the little moments, the quiet, everyday moments that mattered more than any project. For the first time in days, Sarah allowed herself to relax. She sat down next to Lily and pulled the blanket around them both. As they watched TV together, Sarah's mind drifted away from work and responsibility. She focused on her daughter's laughter, the way Lily's eyes lit up when something funny happened on screen. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile. That night, Sarah decided she was going to take a break. Not a permanent one, but a real break. She would give herself permission to step back, to rest, and to focus on what mattered most. Work would still be there when she returned. But for now, she needed to reconnect with herself and her daughter. The next few days felt like a slow, steady climb out of a fog that had clouded Sarah's mind for so long. With Jake's encouragement and a new perspective, she found herself embracing a bit more flexibility in her approach to work and life. Instead of trying to juggle everything at once, she learned to prioritize, to focus on the tasks that truly mattered, and to delegate the rest. Lily seemed to be feeling better too. She was back at school, full of energy, and Sarah made sure to carve out time for the two of them to reconnect. The balance between work and motherhood still felt delicate, but for the first time in a while, it didn't feel impossible. That Wednesday afternoon, Sarah sat in the living room, her laptop open in front of her as she went through the revisions for the campaign. She was still deeply committed to seeing the project through, but now she approached it with a sense of purpose rather than panic. There was no need to burn herself out to prove anything. She was going to do her best, and that was enough. Her phone buzzed, and Sarah picked it up to find a message from Jake. Can we talk? I've got an update on the project that you might want to hear. Sarah took a deep breath. Part of her felt nervous about hearing more updates, especially after the setbacks they'd faced. But another part of her was determined to stay grounded and focus on solutions, not problems. She quickly texted back. Sure, I've got some time now. Call me. Within moments, Jake's voice came through on the other end. Hey, Sarah, I've got some good news. I spoke with the team, and we've managed to get everything back on track. We're pushing through the content delays, and things should be back on schedule by next week. Sarah felt a rush of relief wash over her. Really? That's amazing. I thought we were going to be way behind. Jake laughed lightly. Yeah, we've had a couple of bumps along the way, but we've got it under control. It was a bit of a scramble, but I think we're in a good place now. Thank you, Jake, Sarah said, her voice full of gratitude. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your support through all of this. I'm just doing my job, he replied, his tone warm but serious. But seriously, Sarah, you've been incredible. We couldn't have done it without you. You've really come through in a big way. For the first time in days, Sarah allowed herself to fully relax into the moment. All the tension she had been carrying in her shoulders seemed to melt away. Yes, there would be more challenges ahead, but for now, she had caught her breath. She could see the finish line, and she had the support she needed to get there. That evening, after putting Lily to bed, Sarah sat down to reflect on everything she had been through. There were times when it had felt like she was losing her grip, when the demands of her career and personal life seemed too much to bear. But in those moments of doubt, there had been glimpses of hope, of people who cared, and of the quiet realization that she was capable of handling more than she had given herself credit for. She thought back to her conversation with Jake, how he had told her it was okay to ask for help. It was a revelation that stayed with her, and she wondered why she hadn't allowed herself to ask for that help sooner. For so long, she had been afraid of appearing weak or incapable. She had felt the need to prove herself, both to herself and to others, and in doing so, she had isolated herself in ways she hadn't realized. But now, she understood. Strength wasn't about doing everything alone. It was about knowing when to lean on others, when to ask for support, and when to let go of the unrealistic expectations she had placed on herself. The following week, Sarah walked into the office feeling like a different person. She was still the same woman who had been overwhelmed and unsure, but now she approached her work with a renewed sense of confidence. There would still be challenges, no doubt, but Sarah was no longer trying to do it all on her own. She knew how to ask for help, how to delegate, and how to put her well-being first. As Sarah sat down at her desk, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Lily's teacher, letting her know that Lily had received a great report from her recent school project. Just wanted to let you know, Lily has been doing really well in class lately. She's really come out of her shell this semester, and her last project was fantastic. I'm so proud of her. Sarah smiled as she read the message. It was small moments like this, she realized, that truly mattered. It wasn't about being perfect at everything, it was about being present, about showing up for the people who mattered most in her life. After reading the message, Sarah leaned back in her chair and exhaled. She was starting to get the hang of this balance. It wasn't perfect, and there would still be rough days ahead, but she was no longer drowning under the weight of it all. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah's confidence grew. She worked closely with Jake, constantly checking in to make sure everything was going smoothly with the campaign. She felt more at ease with her role, no longer consumed by fear or self-doubt. She had learned how to ask for what she needed, how to say no when it was necessary, and most importantly, how to put herself and her family first. And Lily, who had been through her own struggles with school and illness, continued to thrive. They spent more time together, enjoying the quiet moments, and Sarah found that this balance, this life where she didn't have to be perfect, was something she could live with. It wasn't about having it all, but about finding peace with what she had. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Life, as Sarah was beginning to realize, was a series of ebbing and flowing moments, a delicate dance between work, family, and self-care. As she continued to balance the demands of the campaign with her responsibilities as a mother, the weeks that followed felt more manageable. She had finally found her rhythm. The nagging stress that used to overshadow everything had begun to subside. Still, she couldn't help but wonder, how long would this balance last? Would the pressure ever creep back in? The phone call that came one Thursday afternoon felt like a sign that everything was about to change again. Sarah had just finished a meeting with Jake and was heading back to her desk when her phone buzzed. She picked it up and saw an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. Hesitating for only a second, she answered. "Hello, this is Sarah," she said, trying to sound casual, though she was already bracing for a potential work emergency. "Hi Sarah, this is Tom Harris. I'm calling from Fitzgerald and Company, the PR agency you've worked with in the past. We have a unique opportunity, and I wanted to see if you might be interested." Sarah raised an eyebrow. Fitzgerald and Company was one of the top PR agencies in the city, and while they had worked together on several smaller campaigns in the past, this sounded like something bigger. "I'm listening," Sarah said, a little intrigued. Tom continued. "We have a client, a major celebrity, in fact, and they're looking for someone with your expertise. They want to launch a new line of products, and they need a consultant who can help with their marketing strategy, the influencer partnerships, and making sure their public image aligns with their brand vision. We think you're a perfect fit. Are you open to discussing this further?" Sarah's mind raced. A celebrity? A huge PR opportunity? The kind of job that could skyrocket her career even further. Her first instinct was to say yes, but then her practical side kicked in. She couldn't take on more without properly assessing everything. "I'm definitely interested, but before I make any decisions, I'd like to know more about what's involved. What's the timeline? And what would the commitment look like?" Tom answered swiftly, "It's a significant project, but we're looking for someone who can work closely with the team and the client. It'll require flexibility, but we're open to negotiations regarding your time. The timeline is tight, but it's manageable. If you're interested, we can set up a meeting next week to discuss the full details." Sarah felt a flutter of excitement, but a deep pang of hesitation lingered in her chest. This was the kind of opportunity she had dreamed about. It was exactly the kind of step she needed to take her career to the next level. But was she ready to juggle such a high-profile project while maintaining the delicate balance she had worked so hard to achieve? "I'll need to think it over," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "Can I get back to you by the end of the day?" "Of course, take your time. I know this is a big decision. Just let me know what you think," Tom said before hanging up. Sarah sat back in her chair, staring at her phone for a moment. She had just been handed an opportunity of a lifetime, but she also knew how easily it could turn into a juggling act she couldn't sustain. Would this be the project that took her career to new heights? Or would it be the tipping point that caused everything to unravel again? After the call, Sarah found herself pacing around the apartment. She knew what this could mean for her career, but she also knew the importance of keeping things in perspective. The last thing she wanted was to sacrifice the peace she had just begun to find, or, worse, neglect the people who mattered most, Lily, her friends, and even Jake. She went to the kitchen, poured herself a cup of coffee, and sat at the table. The steam rose from the mug in front of her, the warmth helping to ground her. There was a part of her that felt this was exactly what she needed, something exciting, something that would reinvigorate her passion for her work. But another part of her knew that she couldn't just dive in without considering how it would affect everything else. As Sarah sat there, she thought back to the conversation she had with Jake a week earlier, how he had reminded her to prioritize her well-being and not feel guilty for asking for help. She remembered how he had been there when everything had felt impossible. The trust they had built made her realize that she wasn't alone in this. If she took on this opportunity, it didn't mean she had to carry the burden herself. She had people around her who cared, who were willing to support her. But still, there was a major decision to be made. If she accepted, the project would demand her attention. The hours would be long, and the stakes would be high. She would need to find a way to make this work without overloading herself. Just as Sarah was lost in thought, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Jake. "Hey, how are you doing? I know things have been busy, but we need to chat soon. I've been thinking about the project and our next steps. Let me know when you have a minute." She stared at the message, her thoughts swirling. It felt like fate, like Jake had sensed she was at a crossroads. She took a deep breath and quickly texted him back. "Got a big opportunity today. Can we talk in an hour?" Jake responded almost immediately. "Absolutely. I'll call you in an hour." As Sarah waited for Jake's call, she felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She wasn't going to make this choice in a vacuum. If she moved forward with the project, she needed to be sure it wouldn't compromise her peace of mind, her family, or her own happiness. But the excitement of the opportunity kept pulling at her. When Jake called, she was ready to open up. "Hey, Jake," she said as she picked up the phone. "Hey, Sarah," he replied. "What's going on? You seemed a little off earlier. Is everything okay?" Sarah took a deep breath before speaking. "I just got off the phone with Fitzgerald and Company. They've offered me a consulting role with one of their celebrity clients. It's a huge opportunity. But I'm torn. I've worked so hard to get to this point, but I'm also really mindful of everything I've just started to balance: my health, my family, my career. I don't want to bite off more than I can chew." Jake was silent for a moment before he spoke. "That's a huge decision, Sarah. But you've handled so much already. I think you're more than capable of taking this on, especially if you're able to lean on the team. It could be a game changer for your career, but I understand if you don't feel ready." "Thanks, Jake," Sarah said softly. "I needed to hear that. I think I'm going to go for it." Jake's voice softened. "You've got this. But remember, don't lose yourself in the process. You've learned how to balance, just keep doing that. You don't have to do everything at once." Sarah felt a rush of gratitude toward Jake. "I won't forget. Thanks for being there for me." As they hung up, Sarah knew what she had to do. She would say yes to the opportunity, but she would do so on her own terms. She would approach it with the same sense of balance and intention she had cultivated in recent weeks. This was just another step in her journey, and she was ready to take it. Sarah woke up early the next morning, the sunlight creeping through the blinds and bathing her bedroom in a soft glow. The decision had been made, and now, it was time to move forward. The weight of the opportunity, one that could take her career to new heights, was still heavy, but Sarah felt something else too: excitement. It was a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to indulge in for a long time. She was no longer consumed with fear or self-doubt. Instead, she was ready to face this challenge head-on. She got out of bed and moved toward the kitchen to start her day. As she made her coffee, her thoughts ran wild with the possibilities ahead. She would need to jump in right away, but she felt more prepared than she had ever been in the past. She was no longer chasing perfection. She was focused on the process, on doing her best and learning along the way. Her phone buzzed again, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Jake. "Excited for you, Sarah. Let's talk soon about how we can make this work smoothly. We've got your back." She smiled as she read the message. Having Jake's support meant the world to her. He had been more than just a colleague or business partner, he had become a friend, a mentor even. She couldn't have asked for a better person to be in her corner. As she sipped her coffee, Sarah thought about the task ahead. The celebrity client, someone well-known, influential, and with a massive following, was undoubtedly going to bring her visibility in the industry. The pressure was on, but this was her chance to make an impression that would solidify her as an expert in her field. If she could pull this off, it would not only benefit her career but also provide her with opportunities she hadn't even begun to imagine. Still, there was that lingering question: how would she balance this new venture with her existing commitments? How would she manage the campaign she had been working on, her growing responsibilities, and her personal life? She knew the stakes were high, but Sarah also understood that she couldn't let the fear of the unknown hold her back. It had been far too long since she had truly embraced a new challenge, and this was her moment. Later that afternoon, Sarah sat in her home office, staring at the email Tom had sent with the initial details of the project. It was extensive. There were timelines, brand objectives, market research, and all the specifics that came with working with such a high-profile client. As she read through everything, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the challenge in front of her. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just a job, it was a mission. Her phone rang, breaking her concentration. It was Tom from Fitzgerald and Company. "Hey, Sarah," he said, his voice full of enthusiasm. "I just wanted to follow up on our conversation earlier. I'm glad to hear you're on board. I know this is a big step for you, but we've got a great team here to support you. I'd love to set up a meeting with the client next week to go over everything in detail. Are you available?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Absolutely, I'm ready. Just send me the details, and I'll make sure I'm prepared. I want to hit the ground running." Tom was pleased. "That's exactly the attitude we need. I'll get the details to you. We're excited to have you on board, Sarah." After hanging up, Sarah felt a sense of clarity. She had made the right decision, and now it was time to put everything she had into this project. There would be hard work, long hours, and moments of doubt, but she was committed to seeing it through. No more second-guessing herself. No more doubting her capabilities. She quickly opened her calendar and blocked out time for the upcoming meeting. She would need to make sure she had ample time to prepare. This was her chance to shine. As she scheduled, she realized how far she had come. She was no longer the woman who felt like she had to do everything herself. She had support, resources, and the right mindset to take on whatever came her way. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah dove headfirst into the project, reviewing the materials from Fitzgerald and Company, coordinating with the team, and preparing for the big meeting. The more she immersed herself in the work, the more she realized just how capable she was. It wasn't just about the technical skills she had acquired over the years, it was about the growth she had experienced personally. She had learned to manage her stress, to trust others, and most importantly, to trust herself. In the midst of all the work, Sarah took a moment to reflect on the lessons she had learned over the past several months. She thought about how she had fallen into the trap of perfectionism, how she had struggled with balance, and how those struggles had brought her to this point. If she hadn't confronted her own fears and doubts, she never would have taken this leap. She also thought about her daughter, Lily, and how far she had come. The bond between them had grown stronger, and Sarah was more present in her life than ever before. The mornings they spent together, the quiet evenings, the trips to the park, they were all moments she cherished. Lily had been through her own tough times, and seeing how resilient she was inspired Sarah to keep pushing forward. If Lily could overcome the challenges she faced, so could Sarah. Finally, the day of the meeting arrived. Sarah woke up early, nervous but excited. She had prepared thoroughly, and now, it was time to put everything into action. After making sure Lily was settled with a sitter, she put on her professional attire and left for the meeting with a mix of anticipation and determination. When she arrived at Fitzgerald and Company, she was greeted by Tom and the rest of the team. The meeting room was sleek, modern, and filled with a sense of anticipation. It was clear that this project was going to be a big deal, and Sarah was ready to step up. The client arrived shortly after, a well-known figure in the entertainment world. Sarah had seen them on TV and in the tabloids, but now, standing in front of them, she felt the weight of the moment. This was her chance to prove herself. She smiled, greeted the client, and began discussing the strategy. The conversation flowed effortlessly. Sarah was confident, prepared, and professional. She outlined the marketing strategy, provided insights, and offered creative ideas that were well received by the team and the client. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that Sarah had not only earned the trust of the team but had also impressed the client with her expertise and vision. As she walked out of the meeting, her heart raced with exhilaration. This was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, but Sarah was no longer the woman who feared them. She was a woman who embraced them. Sarah woke up to the sound of her alarm blaring through the quiet of her bedroom. She groggily reached out to silence it, her hand brushing over the smooth surface of the nightstand. The morning light streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the room. It felt like the calm before the storm. She had always been a morning person, but today was different. The meeting with the celebrity client had gone well, better than she had expected. The client had been receptive to her ideas and seemed genuinely excited about the direction they were heading. Yet, as she lay in bed, she could feel the weight of what was to come. Today was the first day of the real work. The pressure of delivering on the promise she'd made to herself, to make this project a success, was beginning to settle in. She couldn't afford to let anything slip. Not now. As Sarah made her coffee, her mind kept racing. She had already mapped out the initial steps for the marketing campaign, but the logistics, the influencers, the partnerships, it was all going to take an incredible amount of work. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes. One wrong move, and the entire project could falter. And failure, for someone like her, wasn't an option. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her spiraling thoughts. It was a message from Jake. "Hey Sarah, I know things are about to get crazy, but remember, you're not in this alone. I've got your back. Let's touch base later today." Sarah smiled to herself. She appreciated Jake's constant support. He always seemed to know exactly what to say, and it reminded her that even though this was her project, she had a team around her. She quickly replied. "Thanks, Jake. I really needed that. I'll call you later today." The phone buzzed again, this time from Tom at Fitzgerald and Company. "Morning, Sarah. Just a heads up, the client's team will be in town next week. They want to set up a series of strategy meetings. I'll get you the details. Hope you're ready." Sarah's stomach fluttered with the mention of strategy meetings. The gravity of the project was beginning to hit her. This was no longer just a task, this was a high-profile, high-stakes opportunity that could change everything. She set the phone down and took a deep breath. She wasn't just handling a client's needs now, she was working with a celebrity who had an army of people involved, PR, marketing teams, managers, agents, and more. Everyone was watching. She couldn't fail. The day was a blur of phone calls, emails, and meetings. Sarah reviewed the strategy documents and began drafting an action plan for the influencer partnerships. The scope of the project felt overwhelming at times, but Sarah refused to let the panic rise. She was determined to be calculated and precise. But by the time the clock struck 6 that evening, exhaustion weighed on her shoulders. She had barely looked at her phone since the morning. There had been no time. As she wrapped up her day, Sarah realized she hadn't had time to check in with Lily. She'd been so consumed with the work ahead that she hadn't even asked about her day. She grabbed her phone and quickly texted. "Hey sweetie, how was school today? Miss you." She pressed send and sat back, guilt creeping in. Being so focused on her career was a double-edged sword. She was building something big, something important, but at what cost? Before she could spiral, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Lily. It was good. "I got an A on my math test. Can we go to the park after dinner?" Sarah's heart swelled. The feeling of pride and love for her daughter was enough to wash away any of the guilt she had felt earlier. She quickly texted back. "Of course. We'll go as soon as I finish up here. I'm so proud of you. A's are amazing." Later that evening, Sarah and Lily were at the park, the cool evening breeze brushing against their faces. Lily ran ahead, her laughter echoing through the air. Sarah watched her daughter, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for these moments. It was easy to get caught up in the whirlwind of work, but it was moments like these that kept her grounded. They sat on the swings together, Sarah pushing Lily higher with each swing. "I'm so proud of you, Lily. You're growing up so fast," Sarah said, her voice soft. Lily beamed. "Thanks, Mom. I'm proud of you too. I know you're working hard. I think you're gonna do amazing things with your job." The words caught Sarah off guard. Her daughter, so young, had a way of seeing the bigger picture. Sarah realized she wasn't the only one affected by her work. Lily saw her ambition, her struggle, and her dedication. It was shaping her too. "Thanks, sweetie. That means the world to me," Sarah replied, pushing the swing a little higher. After a while, they walked home together, and Sarah's thoughts returned to the pressure of the project. She knew that the next few weeks would be intense. There were moments she questioned her ability to keep everything balanced, but then she would remember Lily's words, "I'm proud of you too." It was a reminder that everything she was doing, both for herself and her daughter, was worth it. The next few days were a blur of preparations. Strategy meetings loomed ahead, and Sarah was determined to be ready. She spent hours each evening refining her proposals, researching potential influencer partners, and ensuring that everything was aligned with the brand's vision. There was no room for error. Jake called later in the week to check in. "Hey, how's everything going?" he asked. "It's a lot," Sarah admitted. "I've got strategy meetings next week, and I'm feeling the pressure. The client has high expectations, and everything has to be perfect." "You've got this, Sarah. But don't burn yourself out. Take breaks when you need them. You can't pour from an empty cup," Jake said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I know," Sarah replied. "I'll make sure to take a breather." As she hung up the phone, Sarah realized that she needed to listen to Jake's advice. The pressure was mounting, but she didn't want to sacrifice her well-being in the process. It was important to stay grounded. Sarah was sitting in her home office, a cup of cold coffee sitting forgotten on the desk, the glare of the computer screen reflected in her tired eyes. She had spent the last few days putting together the final touches for the strategy meeting with the client. The pressure to make everything perfect was starting to take a toll on her, but she had pushed through, reminding herself that this was her moment to shine. Her phone buzzed, breaking her concentration. It was an email from Tom at Fitzgerald & Company, the subject line reading, "Urgent, client concerns." Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She clicked on the email, her eyes scanning the contents quickly. "Sarah, we've received some concerns from the client's team regarding the proposed direction of the campaign. They feel it's not aligned with their initial vision and have asked for significant changes. They want a meeting to go over everything. Can you be available tomorrow at 9 a.m. to discuss? Let me know as soon as you can. Tom." A rush of panic surged through her. This was the last thing she needed right before the meeting. The client had been excited, and now, this? She felt a wave of frustration, but she couldn't afford to let it overwhelm her. The last few days had been focused on perfecting the details, and now everything was at risk of unraveling. She immediately picked up her phone and dialed Tom. "Hey, Tom, I just saw the email. What exactly are they concerned about?" she asked, her voice tight with anxiety. Tom's voice was steady but filled with urgency. "It seems like the client feels that the campaign is veering too far from what they originally envisioned. They want a shift in tone, a stronger emphasis on a different demographic. They're not completely unhappy, but they want more drastic changes. It's a big adjustment." Sarah took a deep breath. "This is a major setback, Tom. I thought we were on the right track. What should I do?" "You'll need to meet with them tomorrow, listen carefully to their feedback, and come up with a plan to address their concerns. I'm confident you can handle it," Tom reassured her. Sarah nodded, even though Tom couldn't see her. "I'll do my best. I won't let them down." After hanging up, Sarah sat in silence for a moment, staring at the screen. The weight of the situation was almost unbearable. She had spent weeks building up to this, putting her heart and soul into every aspect of the campaign. Now, everything felt like it was about to come crashing down. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Fitzgerald and Company early, her mind racing. She had barely slept the night before, too consumed with thoughts of how to fix the campaign. The coffee in her hand was more of a necessity than a comfort at this point. She met with Tom briefly before heading into the conference room, where the client's team was already waiting. The room was tense. The client's representatives sat at the long table, their faces serious, and Sarah could sense the underlying frustration in the air. She couldn't afford to appear frazzled. This was a critical moment, and she had to stay calm and professional. "Thank you for meeting with us," Sarah began, taking a seat at the head of the table. "I understand you have some concerns, and I'm here to listen and address them." The client's PR manager, a sharply dressed woman named Jennifer, spoke first. "We appreciate the effort you've put into this campaign, Sarah, but we're not seeing the vision we expected. The demographic focus needs to shift, more emphasis on our younger audience, and a lighter, more approachable tone. We feel like the current direction is a bit too serious." Sarah nodded, mentally noting their feedback. "I understand, Jennifer. Can you clarify which aspects of the campaign you feel need to change to align with that tone?" Jennifer leaned forward. "The messaging needs to be more relatable, more engaging for our social media followers. Think less about the high-end lifestyle and more about accessibility and fun. We want to feel like we're speaking to our fans, not just to an elite group." Sarah listened carefully, taking notes as the rest of the client's team chimed in with their own thoughts. She could feel the pressure mounting with each passing second. But instead of panicking, she focused on the problem at hand. This wasn't the time to get defensive. She needed to stay objective. "Thank you for that feedback," Sarah said after a long pause. "I hear you, and I can see where you're coming from. I want to assure you that we can adjust the campaign to better reflect your vision. We can make the tone lighter and shift the focus to a more accessible demographic. I will work with the team to come up with a revised strategy that aligns with your needs. I appreciate your honesty in sharing your thoughts with us." Jennifer seemed satisfied with Sarah's response, and the mood in the room lightened slightly. "We know this is a lot to ask, but we're confident in your abilities, Sarah. Just make sure we can see these changes before we move forward." As the meeting concluded, Sarah walked out of the conference room feeling both relieved and exhausted. The worst of it was over, but the real work was just beginning. She had a lot of adjustments to make, and very little time to do it. She quickly texted Jake. "We have a major shift in direction. The client wants a younger, more accessible tone. Can we talk later? I need your input." Jake's reply came swiftly. "Got it. I'll clear my schedule. Let's go over everything when you're ready." Sarah called him as soon as she was back at her desk. "I can't believe this, Jake. We were so close to the finish line. Now, I feel like we have to start from scratch. I'm overwhelmed." Jake's voice was calm and steady. "You've got this, Sarah. You've already put in the work. Now it's just about refining it. We'll figure it out together. Let's break it down, step by step." His words gave Sarah a sense of relief. She wasn't alone in this. They were in it together. The next few days were a blur of late nights and relentless adjustments. Sarah reviewed the client's feedback, revamped the strategy, and worked tirelessly with her team to create a new plan that would meet the client's expectations. There was no time to second-guess herself, every moment was precious. By the time the revised proposal was ready, Sarah felt both exhausted and exhilarated. She had pushed through the setback, stayed focused, and come up with a solution. The pressure had been intense, but it had also fueled her determination to succeed. The day of the follow-up meeting arrived, and Sarah was ready. She had taken every piece of feedback into account and crafted a new campaign direction that she felt confident would resonate with the client. This time, when she walked into the meeting, she was calm, collected, and prepared. As she presented the revised plan, she could see the change in the client's demeanor. The tension had lifted, and there was a sense of relief in the room. They were pleased with the new direction, and by the end of the meeting, Sarah could sense that she had regained their trust. As she walked out of the meeting, a wave of exhaustion washed over her, but so did a sense of accomplishment. She had faced a major setback, but instead of letting it derail her, she had adapted and come out stronger on the other side. The days following the revised presentation were a whirlwind. The client was pleased with the changes Sarah had made to the campaign, but there was still work to be done. Meetings were scheduled with influencers, the marketing team was pulled into overdrive, and Sarah had barely a moment to catch her breath. It felt like a momentary victory, but deep down, Sarah knew that the real challenge was just beginning. The stakes had only gotten higher. She could see the finish line, but it was still far off, and she knew that the road ahead would be filled with even more obstacles. The pressure from all sides was mounting. Even her home life felt like it was being put on hold. Lily had started to notice her mother's absence. When Sarah got home from work, it was often too late to help with homework or even have a proper conversation. The guilt gnawed at her. She wasn't just building a career, she was missing out on precious time with her daughter. But despite the mounting pressure, there was a part of Sarah that had never felt more alive. She was working harder than she ever had before, but she could feel the excitement building, knowing that the work she was doing could lead to something incredible. This was what she had dreamed about, what she had fought for. It was late one night when Sarah received a text message from Jake. It was after 11 p.m., and she had just finished reviewing some campaign details when the notification buzzed on her phone. "Sarah, I know it's late, but I think we need to talk. Call me when you have a minute." Sarah's stomach tightened. She had a million things on her mind, but she knew that Jake's message wasn't one to ignore. She dialed his number immediately. "Hey, what's going on?" Sarah asked as she picked up the phone. Jake's voice was serious. "I've been thinking about everything, and I just want to make sure you're doing okay. I know you're juggling a lot right now, and it's easy to get caught up in all the work, but I can see how stressed you are. I don't want you to burn out." Sarah sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't have a choice, Jake. The client is relying on me. There's too much at stake here. I can't just back off now." "I get that," Jake replied, his voice gentle. "But you don't have to carry all the weight yourself. You've got a team, and they're there for you. You don't need to do it all. And, you know, you've got me too." His words caught Sarah off guard. She knew Jake cared, but she hadn't realized how much she had been shutting him out. She had been so focused on her work that she hadn't even allowed herself to lean on anyone, not even him. "You're right," Sarah said softly. "I've been so wrapped up in everything. I guess I just thought if I kept pushing harder, it would all come together. But I've been neglecting my own well-being." Jake laughed lightly. "That's pretty typical of you. You always put everyone else first. But you can't pour from an empty cup, Sarah. Take a break. Step back for a bit. Trust me, you'll come back stronger." Sarah smiled, a small weight lifting off her chest. "Thanks, Jake. I needed to hear that. I think I've just been too afraid to slow down. I'm so close, but I don't want to lose myself in the process." "Don't worry," Jake said, "you won't. You're already doing amazing, and everyone around you sees it. Just remember that you don't have to do it alone." The next day, Sarah took Jake's advice to heart. She carved out some time for herself, something she hadn't done in weeks. After work, she spent an hour at the park, walking alone and letting her mind wander. It felt like a luxury. She hadn't realized how much she needed that time to recharge, to think without the constant pressure of the campaign hanging over her. As she walked, Sarah thought about her life, about Lily, about the future. She remembered what her daughter had said a few days ago, "I'm proud of you too." That moment with Lily had shifted something inside her. It wasn't just about work, it was about balance, about being present in all aspects of her life. She could be ambitious and still find joy in the small moments. She could be successful and still be there for Lily. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. She could do this. She could balance her dreams and her responsibilities. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was possible. That evening, when Sarah got home, Lily was waiting for her. She had a big grin on her face, holding up a piece of paper. "Look, Mom. I got another A on my science quiz." Sarah's heart swelled with pride. "That's amazing, Lily. You're really on fire with these grades. I'm so proud of you." Lily bounced around the living room, full of energy. "Thanks, Mom. I couldn't have done it without your help. I know you've been super busy, but you always make time for me when I need it." Sarah kneeled down to Lily's level, pulling her into a tight hug. "You mean the world to me, kiddo. I know I've been a little distracted lately, but I'm here for you. Always." Lily smiled up at her. "I know, Mom. And you're going to do great with your job too. You're going to make a difference." That simple exchange, those words of encouragement from her daughter, grounded Sarah more than anything else. She realized that no matter what happened with the campaign, no matter how difficult things got, she had everything she needed right in front of her. Love. Support. And the drive to make a real impact, not just in her career, but in her life. The next day, Sarah walked into the office with renewed energy. She had a clear sense of purpose, and although the campaign still had its challenges, she felt ready to face them head-on. She knew that she didn't have to sacrifice her personal life to be successful. It was about finding harmony, not perfection. As she sat down at her desk, Jake called again. "You good?" he asked. "Better than ever," Sarah replied, a smile spreading across her face. "Thanks for reminding me what's really important." "Anytime," Jake said, his voice warm. "You're doing great, Sarah. Now go knock this project out of the park." As Sarah continued to pour her energy into the campaign, she began to notice subtle changes in herself. She was still driven by her ambition, but something had shifted in her approach. No longer was she the workaholic who shut out everything else for the sake of success. She had found a rhythm, one where her work and personal life could coexist without destroying each other. And in that balance, she found a new kind of strength. Her meetings with the client were going well, and the team had rallied behind her. They were all fully invested in the project, their enthusiasm contagious. She had started to feel a sense of camaraderie, a shared mission, that made the late nights more bearable and the pressure less overwhelming. But there was still one thing left, one final hurdle that, if cleared, could make or break everything. The day before the final presentation, Sarah sat down with her team to review everything. The changes, the feedback, the tweaks, they had all come together into something she was proud of. She looked around the table at her colleagues, Jake, Lucy, Tom, and the rest of the crew. They had all worked tirelessly to get to this point. "All right, team," Sarah said, standing up and addressing them. "Tomorrow is the big day. We're presenting our final proposal, and I can feel it, we're so close. We've put in the work, we've made the adjustments, and now it's time to show the client exactly what we've got." Tom, who had been with her from the very beginning, gave her a knowing smile. "You've led us through this every step of the way, Sarah. I think we've got it." But despite his confidence, Sarah couldn't shake the nerves that had started to creep in. The weight of it all was still there. She had seen what was at stake, and she knew that one wrong move could lead to disaster. This wasn't just about impressing the client, it was about proving to herself that she could balance everything and still succeed. Jake, noticing the tension in her posture, leaned over and whispered, "You've got this, Sarah. We all believe in you." His words grounded her. She nodded, taking a deep breath. "All right, let's go over the final presentation one more time. We're not leaving this room until we're sure it's perfect." The night passed in a blur. They reviewed every slide, every note, every detail. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of doubt, but each time they hit a roadblock, they found a way over it. When the clock finally struck 1 a.m., Sarah felt the exhaustion start to take over her body, but there was something else, a sense of calm. They had done everything they could. Now, it was time to let go and trust the work they had put in. The next morning, Sarah woke up early, despite the late night. She got dressed in a crisp, navy blue suit, a sharp contrast to the exhaustion in her eyes. Today wasn't about looking perfect, it was about showing up, confident in the work they had done. She grabbed a quick breakfast, kissed Lily goodbye, and left for the office, trying to ignore the butterflies in her stomach. When she arrived, the team was already gathering around the conference room table, ready for the final push. She could see the same nerves on their faces, but there was an undercurrent of excitement too. This was it. The moment they had all worked for. Sarah walked in and gave them a reassuring smile. "Let's do this." The presentation was nerve-wracking. The client's team sat before them, eyes sharp, ready to dissect every detail of the campaign. Sarah led the presentation, walking them through each segment, explaining the changes they had made, and how those changes aligned perfectly with the client's new vision. Her voice was steady, but she could feel the weight of their gazes on her, the unspoken pressure to deliver something extraordinary. As she went over the social media campaign, highlighting the new focus on younger audiences, she watched the clients' faces. Jennifer, the PR manager, was nodding along, but there was still that skeptical look in her eyes. Sarah couldn't read her expression entirely, but she wasn't about to let that throw her off. "This is great work, Sarah," Jennifer said when the presentation ended, her tone cautious but impressed. "You really listened to our feedback and made the adjustments. But let's talk about the budget. I know we've been going back and forth on this, and we're still concerned about the costs associated with some of the influencer partnerships." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The budget had always been a tricky subject. She knew it was going to be a sticking point, but now wasn't the time to back down. "I understand your concerns, Jennifer," Sarah replied, keeping her voice calm. "But these influencers are integral to reaching the demographic we've targeted. The investment will pay off in the long run, driving engagement and brand loyalty that will more than justify the initial costs." There was a long pause. Sarah could see Jennifer mulling over her words, weighing the pros and cons. The tension in the room was palpable. Then, finally, Jennifer spoke. "We agree. We'll move forward with the campaign as you've outlined, but we need to tighten up a few specific details regarding the partnerships. Once we finalize those, we'll be good to go." A wave of relief washed over Sarah, but she didn't allow herself to relax just yet. "Absolutely. We'll adjust those details and have the final contract ready within the next 2 days." The meeting wrapped up, and as the client's team filed out, Sarah's team exchanged glances. They had done it. They had won. After the meeting, Sarah allowed herself to breathe. The weight of the world didn't exactly fall off her shoulders, but the uncertainty had been replaced with a sense of accomplishment. She had faced her fears, overcome the obstacles, and had come out on top. Not only had she delivered an exceptional campaign, but she had done it while keeping her sense of balance intact. Later that evening, after celebrating with her team, Sarah returned home to find Lily waiting for her, as always. "How did it go, Mom?" Lily asked eagerly. Sarah smiled, pulling her daughter into a hug. "It went great, kiddo. We did it." Lily's face lit up. "I knew you would. You always do." Sarah kissed the top of her head, feeling the warmth of her daughter's love. "Thanks for believing in me, sweetheart." As she stood there, holding her daughter, Sarah realized that the journey had taught her more than she could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about the success of the campaign or the validation from the client. It was about finding her own strength, about realizing that she could have it all: success, love, and the ability to be present in both worlds. And as she looked to the future, she knew this was just the beginning. The days following the successful campaign presentation were a blur of excitement and relief. Sarah had finally felt that sense of achievement she had longed for, and the team's morale was higher than ever. The client was happy, the project was moving forward, and for the first time in months, Sarah felt like she could breathe again. But just as she thought she could enjoy a well-earned moment of peace, a new challenge emerged. It started with an unexpected phone call on a quiet Thursday morning. Sarah was at her desk, sipping her coffee, reviewing her emails when her phone buzzed. It was a number she didn't recognize, but something in her gut told her it was important. She picked up the phone, expecting a routine inquiry about the campaign. "Hello, this is Sarah," she said, trying to keep her tone professional despite the unease building inside her. "Hi, is this Sarah Thompson?" a voice on the other end asked, its tone clipped and formal. "Yes, it is," Sarah replied, adjusting in her seat. "This is Brian from Mason & Company. We're a legal firm. I need to discuss something important with you regarding your recent work with our client, Bloom Cosmetics." The mention of Bloom Cosmetics sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Mason & Company were a high-profile law firm known for handling corporate legal issues. She'd heard rumors that they dealt with high-stakes disputes, but she hadn't anticipated anything to come her way. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. Is there an issue with the campaign?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm afraid there's been some sort of misunderstanding with the intellectual property involved in your campaign," Brian continued, his voice cold. "We've received complaints from one of your influencer partners, and now we need to look into this further. It's serious. I suggest you come in as soon as possible." Sarah's heart sank. She had been through countless negotiations and creative decisions over the past few months, but she had never imagined she'd be facing a legal issue like this. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of the conversation. "Can you clarify what you mean? What sort of misunderstanding?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "I'm afraid I can't go into detail over the phone. You'll need to meet with our team to discuss this." "I'll send over the details," Brian replied before hanging up abruptly. The phone call left Sarah rattled. She stared at her desk, feeling the weight of uncertainty press down on her. She didn't have the luxury of taking things lightly, not when the success of the campaign, her career, and the future of her team were on the line. Sarah spent the next several hours consumed by worry. She went over every part of the campaign in her mind, trying to pinpoint where things could have gone wrong. She reviewed the contracts, checked the influencer agreements, and spoke with her team to gather more information. But everything seemed above board. It wasn't until later that afternoon, when she met with Jake for their usual check-in, that she realized the scope of the problem. "Did you get that call too?" Jake asked, his brow furrowing as soon as Sarah mentioned it. "Yeah. It's about a potential legal issue with one of our influencers. I'm not sure what happened, but it sounds serious." "Legal issues? That's not good," Jake said. He rubbed his temples, clearly frustrated. "I can't believe this is happening after everything we've just been through. Do you need me to come with you? I could help you sort things out." Sarah shook her head. "No. I need to go by myself. I think this is something I have to handle directly. I'll keep you posted, though." Jake gave her a supportive look. "You've got this. Just don't go in blind. Ask them what exactly is at stake and get as much information as you can." The next morning, Sarah arrived at Mason & Company's sleek, modern office building. The lobby was immaculate, with polished marble floors and high ceilings. As she waited for the receptionist to notify Brian of her arrival, her nerves kicked in again. She glanced at the clock, time seemed to slow down. When Brian came to greet her, he looked exactly as he had sounded on the phone, formal, composed, and carrying the heavy weight of bad news. He led her into a conference room with a long glass table, where several other attorneys were seated, flipping through documents. One of them, a woman in her 40s with sharp features and an authoritative air, stood up as Sarah entered. "Ms. Thompson," the woman said, her voice clipped. "I'm Rachel, and I specialize in intellectual property law. Thank you for coming in on such short notice." Sarah offered a polite smile, though she could feel her stomach churn with anxiety. "I'm just trying to understand what's going on. Can you explain the situation?" Rachel gestured for Sarah to sit. "Of course. Let me first explain that this is a very serious matter. One of your influencers, a popular lifestyle blogger named Chelsea Grant, has filed a complaint against your company and the campaign you're running for Bloom Cosmetics. She claims that her likeness has been used without her permission in certain creative assets, and that this usage violated her contract." Sarah blinked, unable to grasp what she was hearing. Chelsea. She had been one of the most reliable influencers they had worked with, and she couldn't imagine her causing a problem like this. "Chelsea Grant?" Sarah asked, trying to process the information. "I don't understand. We had a clear agreement in place with her. She even signed off on all content before it went live." Brian handed Sarah a folder. "Here are the details of her complaint. According to Chelsea, the final version of the ad that was published included certain edits she didn't approve. She claims that the alterations to her image, combined with the way her name was used, misrepresented her brand. She's now threatening to sue." Sarah felt a wave of frustration and disbelief. "But we have the signed agreement. She gave her approval. We followed all the necessary procedures." Rachel gave her a sympathetic look. "I understand, Ms. Thompson. But there's a legal gray area here. What Chelsea is claiming is that, although she signed off on an earlier draft, she was not adequately informed that additional edits were made before the final version went live. She's alleging that those changes were significant enough to warrant a breach of contract." Sarah's mind raced as she flipped through the documents. This wasn't just a small misunderstanding, it was a full-blown legal crisis. Chelsea was threatening a lawsuit, and the consequences could be devastating. As the meeting continued, Sarah felt the walls closing in. What had once been a dream campaign now felt like a nightmare. This unexpected setback threatened not only her career but also the future of the campaign she had worked so hard to build. As she left Mason and Company's office, Sarah felt the weight of the situation press down on her. How could she fix this? How could she salvage the trust of the influencer, the client, and the team? But one thing was certain, Sarah wasn't about to let this setback define her. She had faced challenges before, and this was just another one that she would have to navigate. It wasn't going to be easy, but Sarah was determined to find a way through it. She would fix this, no matter what it took. The next few days felt like a whirlwind of legal jargon, conference calls, and sleepless nights. Sarah had always prided herself on being able to handle stressful situations, but this was different. This wasn't just a setback, it was a crisis, one that had the potential to tear down everything she had worked so hard to build. She was no longer just an ambitious campaign manager, now, she was fighting to protect her reputation and the integrity of her team. She spent hours on the phone with Mason and Company, poring over legal documents and clarifying every detail of the influencer contract. She reviewed all communication with Chelsea Grant, trying to pinpoint where the breakdown had occurred. Every time she thought she had a solid grasp on the situation, a new complication emerged. The hardest part, however, was seeing the doubt in the eyes of her team. They had trusted her to lead them, and now, with the lawsuit hanging over them, Sarah could sense the tension. They were all wondering the same thing, would they make it through this? Jake was the first to pull her aside. It had been 2 days since the legal meeting, and the weight of the situation had clearly begun to take its toll. Sarah could feel the exhaustion settling into her bones, but there was no time to rest. Not now. Sarah, can we talk? Jake asked, his voice laced with concern. He was usually the upbeat one, always offering a word of encouragement, but today, his tone was different. Yeah, of course, Sarah said, her eyes heavy with fatigue. What's on your mind? Jake looked around the office before lowering his voice. I know you're doing everything you can to fix this, but, are we going to be okay? I mean, the client's already got to be worried, and now this whole lawsuit thing. It's getting messy, and I don't know if they're going to stick with us. Sarah could feel the pressure mounting. I don't know yet, she said honestly. But we can't give up. We have to fight this. We've put too much into this campaign to let it fall apart over a misunderstanding. Jake nodded, but his expression didn't ease. I'm with you. We all are. But I don't want to see you burn out, Sarah. You need to take care of yourself, too. Sarah appreciated his words, but there was no room for self-care right now. The priority was to clear her name and resolve the legal mess. She didn't have the luxury of slowing down, even if she was on the verge of exhaustion. I'll be fine, Sarah replied with a forced smile, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it herself. The next few days were a blur of emails, calls, and late-night strategy sessions with the legal team. Sarah was living off caffeine and sheer willpower, determined to find a way to salvage the situation. She knew that Chelsea's complaint wasn't just about the edits, it was about a perceived violation of trust. If she could prove that the edits were both necessary and transparent, perhaps they could avoid going to court. But proving that to Chelsea, who had suddenly turned into a vocal critic, was another challenge altogether. Late one evening, Sarah sat alone in her office, reviewing a series of texts from Chelsea. The influencer was growing more adamant in her demands, accusing Sarah's team of not being transparent and threatening to expose the entire campaign on social media if the issue wasn't resolved to her satisfaction. In an effort to calm the situation, Sarah drafted a response. She kept her tone professional, apologizing for the misunderstanding and offering to meet in person to discuss the matter. It wasn't easy, she was frustrated, but she knew that escalating things further would only make it worse. She needed to be strategic. Before she could send the message, a notification flashed on her phone. It was a direct message from Chelsea. The message was short but chilling, I'm done. The whole campaign is a disaster. I'm taking my name off everything. Sarah's heart sank. The last thing she needed was Chelsea turning on them publicly. But this was it, the moment she had to act. The next morning, Sarah arranged a face-to-face meeting with Chelsea. It was risky, but she had no choice. She needed to speak directly to Chelsea, to explain the situation and convince her that the edits weren't done with malicious intent. But there was a part of her, deep down, that feared the influencer had already made up her mind. When she arrived at the coffee shop where they had agreed to meet, Sarah spotted Chelsea immediately. She was sitting at a table by the window, her phone in hand, looking every bit the image of a social media influencer, stylish and confident. But her eyes were hard, her posture tense. Chelsea, Sarah said as she walked up to the table, trying to keep her voice calm. I'm really glad we could meet in person. I think we need to clear up some of these misunderstandings. Chelsea didn't look up from her phone. I don't know if there's much to clear up, she said, her voice sharp. You used my image without fully explaining the edits. I've built my brand on authenticity, Sarah. You've ruined that. Sarah sat down across from her, carefully choosing her words. I understand why you feel that way, Chelsea. But I promise you, there was no intention to undermine your brand or make you look bad. The edits were meant to enhance the visuals, not change the message. We've always been transparent with you, and I'm sorry if you felt otherwise. Chelsea finally looked up, her eyes narrowed. Transparency. You think a few emails and a signed contract fix everything? I'm not some disposable asset, Sarah. You can't just tweak my image and expect me to roll with it. The words hit Sarah harder than she expected. She had always seen her team's work as a collaboration, an effort to create something that benefited everyone involved. But now, sitting here with Chelsea, she realized that she had overlooked one crucial element: trust. The trust between them had been compromised, and now Sarah was fighting to rebuild it. I know you're upset, Sarah said softly, her voice sincere. And I respect the work you've put into your brand. I don't want to hurt that. If you're willing to give us a chance, I want to make things right. We can review everything together, go over the edits, and I'll make sure you're completely comfortable with it. I just need the opportunity to fix this. Chelsea hesitated, her fingers still tapping on the table. Sarah could see the conflict in her eyes, the desire to stand her ground but also the realization that she wasn't dealing with someone who was out to take advantage. I don't know, Chelsea said after a long pause. It's hard for me to trust again after everything that's happened. I get it, Sarah said, her voice firm. But trust takes time, Chelsea. And I'm willing to put in that time if you are. I won't let you down again. There was another long silence. Then, slowly, Chelsea sighed and leaned back in her chair. All right, I'll give you one more chance. But if anything like this happens again, I'm out. Sarah felt a rush of relief, but she kept her expression serious. Thank you. You won't regret it. As Sarah left the coffee shop, her heart was still racing, but she felt a glimmer of hope. The situation was far from over, but it was a start. Chelsea had agreed to work with her again, and that was a victory in itself. But Sarah knew the hard part wasn't over yet. There was still the legal matter to resolve, the pressure from the client to manage, and the burden of keeping her team's morale intact. The road ahead was uncertain, but Sarah was determined to see it through. This was her fight, and she wasn't about to lose. The days after her meeting with Chelsea were a blur of negotiations, emails, and tight deadlines. Sarah had managed to prevent the influencer crisis from escalating into a full-blown disaster, but now, the real test was just beginning. As she navigated the rocky waters of rebuilding trust with Chelsea, another storm was brewing on the horizon. Bloom Cosmetics, the very client she had fought so hard to impress, was beginning to lose patience. Their representatives had been quiet after the legal issues surfaced, but now, their silence had morphed into an uncomfortable tension. Sarah had been summoned to a meeting with Bloom's head of marketing, Laura, someone who had been nothing but supportive of Sarah's campaign vision from the start. But the difference now was that Laura was no longer the ally she had once been. With the controversy over the influencer and the looming legal threat, everything felt on the edge of collapse. The meeting was set for Friday afternoon, in the sleek, modern conference room at Bloom Cosmetics headquarters. The white walls, minimalist decor, and the scent of fresh coffee in the air only heightened the sense of formality. Sarah sat nervously in the waiting area, replaying everything that had led her here. The weight of the previous days hung heavily on her shoulders, both the fear of losing the client and the pressure to convince Bloom to stay on board. When Laura finally emerged from the glass-walled conference room, her expression was unreadable. She nodded curtly at Sarah, signaling that it was time. Let's get this over with, Laura said, her voice cool. We need to have a serious discussion. Sarah followed Laura into the conference room, where she was met by several other senior executives from Bloom Cosmetics, all of them with stern faces. The air was thick with the weight of their collective expectation. Sarah, we've been keeping an eye on the situation, Laura began without preamble, sitting down at the head of the table. As you know, Bloom Cosmetics prides itself on our brand's integrity. The campaign you've worked on is powerful, but the recent complications have raised some serious concerns. Sarah braced herself, feeling the tension in the room increase with every word Laura spoke. She had worked tirelessly on this campaign, and the last thing she wanted was for it to fall apart. "I understand, Laura," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I know this has been a difficult situation, but I'm committed to resolving it. We've already spoken with Chelsea, and she's agreed to move forward with us. We're doing everything we can to fix the issue and keep the campaign on track." Laura exchanged a glance with her colleagues before continuing. "That may be, but we need more than just an agreement with the influencer. We need to know that this won't happen again. And more importantly, we need to see results, not just promises." Sarah swallowed hard. She had expected this conversation to come, but hearing it laid out so plainly was a gut punch. "I'm confident that we can turn this around. The campaign is still a success, and with a few adjustments, we can move forward without any further issues. I just need a little more time to finalize everything and keep the momentum going." Laura's eyes narrowed. "Time is the issue here, Sarah. The campaign was supposed to be a game changer for us, but we've already seen the impact of the negative publicity. We've lost some engagement, and trust with our customers is beginning to erode. At this point, we can't afford to waste any more time. We need a plan of action, now." Sarah's pulse quickened. She could feel the weight of the room bearing down on her. They weren't just questioning the campaign anymore, they were questioning her ability to lead it. "I'm prepared to give you a full action plan," Sarah said, her voice more assertive now. "But I need your support. If you're willing to stick with me, I will deliver. I'll make sure we recover from this." Laura's expression remained cold, but there was a flicker of something else, perhaps doubt, perhaps calculation, before she spoke again. "You have 1 week, Sarah. 1 week to prove that this campaign is worth continuing. If you can't turn things around by then, we'll have to cut ties. No hard feelings, but Bloom needs to move forward with a clear strategy, and we can't afford further distractions." The words hit Sarah like a blow. 1 week. The pressure was on, and there was no room for error. She couldn't afford to fail, not now. The stakes had never been higher. "Understood," Sarah said, trying to keep her composure. "I won't let you down." The moment the meeting ended, Sarah felt like she could barely breathe. She had been given an ultimatum: save the campaign in 7 days or lose Bloom Cosmetics for good. It was an impossible task, but she had no choice but to rise to the challenge. As she left the Bloom Cosmetics headquarters, her mind raced with possibilities. What could she do to reverse the damage? How could she bring the momentum back, especially with everything going wrong? The pressure felt suffocating, and every step she took felt heavier than the last. Sarah didn't waste any time. As soon as she got back to the office, she called an emergency meeting with her team. Jake, Sophie, and the rest of the group gathered in the conference room, looking at her expectantly. "Here's the deal," Sarah began, her voice firm. "Bloom Cosmetics just gave us an ultimatum. We have 1 week to turn this around. If we don't, they're cutting ties with us. They're giving us a chance to fix this, but it's on us to make it happen. I know this is a lot, but we've gotten through tough times before. We can do this again." The room was quiet for a moment, the weight of the situation sinking in. Jake spoke up first. "We're in this together, Sarah. Let's put our heads together and figure out how to turn this ship around. We've done great work already, we just need to refine it and reframe it." Sarah nodded. "Exactly. We'll need to revisit the campaign content, focus on the positives, and most importantly, we need to regain the trust of the public. We'll also be proactive with Chelsea, make sure she's fully on board and communicates her satisfaction with the changes." Sophie added, "We can amp up the engagement through new, fresh influencer partnerships. We've got a solid community, and we need to leverage that to get the conversation going again." The team was on fire, each person contributing their own ideas for how to get the campaign back on track. As Sarah listened, she realized something. She had built a team that didn't just follow orders, they were her partners in this fight. And together, they would rise to the challenge. That night, Sarah barely slept. But instead of the usual feeling of dread that came with looming deadlines, she felt a sense of purpose. This was it, the moment that could either make or break her. She wasn't going to back down. She wasn't going to let the legal issue or Bloom's ultimatum take away everything they had worked for. She had 1 week. And in 1 week, she would turn the campaign around. The weight of Bloom Cosmetics' ultimatum pressed heavily on Sarah's shoulders as she gathered her team. Every moment of the next week would be critical. There would be no room for mistakes. But the only way forward was to act, strategically, decisively, and with unwavering commitment. It was time to pull out all the stops. The team met in the conference room first thing Monday morning, ready to tackle the daunting challenge ahead. Sarah stood at the head of the table, feeling the intensity of their gazes upon her. There was no time to waste, and everyone knew it. "All right," Sarah began, her voice strong and focused. "We have 7 days to turn this around. Bloom has given us an ultimatum. We need to restore their faith in us, and we need to do it fast." She paused, letting the reality of the situation sink in. Then she opened her laptop and projected a plan on the screen. It was a bold strategy, a comprehensive overhaul of the campaign that would shift the narrative and regain public trust. "First things first," Sarah continued, "we need to address the legal issue with Chelsea. She's been our biggest setback, but we've made progress. We have to get her fully back on board. We need a video from her, expressing how happy she is with the revisions. That will show Bloom, and the public, that we're committed to transparency and making things right. If we can get Chelsea's full endorsement, we can restore credibility." Jake raised his hand, his brow furrowed. "What about the influencer community at large? Will they buy into this?" "Great point," Sarah replied. "We'll need to create an influencer campaign that highlights our core values, authenticity, trust, and commitment to quality. We'll bring in a new group of influencers, fresh faces who are well known for being transparent and genuine. That will help rebuild the public perception of our campaign." Sophie, always the creative one, jumped in. "We should also create a series of behind-the-scenes content to show our work with Chelsea and the new influencers. We need to humanize the process, showing the effort we've put into making this campaign something everyone can stand behind." Sarah nodded. "Exactly. People need to see that we've been working tirelessly to make things right. But it's not just about influencers. We need to engage directly with the Bloom Cosmetics community. I want to set up live Q&A sessions with the marketing team, showing the public that we're transparent about our process and listening to their concerns." The energy in the room shifted as the plan began to take shape. Everyone was focused now, every person in the room knew what was at stake. It wasn't just about saving the campaign. It was about proving that they were capable of overcoming the toughest challenges. The next few hours were spent refining the plan. Tasks were assigned, deadlines were set, and the atmosphere in the office was electric with a sense of urgency. Sarah could feel the fire in her belly, the desire to show Bloom Cosmetics, and herself, that she wasn't going to let them down. Jake was tasked with managing the new influencers and negotiating their terms. Sophie began outlining the content calendar for the next few days, planning every post, video, and interaction. Sarah herself would handle the final meeting with Chelsea, ensuring the influencer was fully committed to the new strategy. By the end of the day, they had a clear roadmap, a series of high-impact, transparent communications that would both address the fallout and breathe new life into the campaign. It wasn't going to be easy, but Sarah knew it was the only way forward. The following day, Sarah met with Chelsea once again, this time at a coffee shop near her office. The tension between them was still palpable, but this time, Sarah was armed with a concrete plan. "Chelsea," Sarah began, settling across from her, "I know that what happened wasn't ideal. But I want to make this right, for both you and for the campaign. Chelsea eyed her with skepticism, but Sarah wasn't deterred. She went on to explain the new strategy, how they would address the situation head-on and make the necessary changes. She talked about the behind-the-scenes content, the new influencers who would help elevate the campaign, and the video endorsement Sarah wanted from her. "This is a chance to set the record straight, Chelsea," Sarah said, her voice sincere. "We need you to stand with us, to show the world that we're all in this together. Your voice matters, and I can promise you, we've learned from this experience." Chelsea remained silent for a moment, her fingers tapping the table as she processed what Sarah was saying. Finally, she nodded slowly. "All right," she said, her voice cool but not as cold as it had been before. "I'll do it. But this needs to be the last time something like this happens." Sarah smiled, feeling a rush of relief. "You have my word, Chelsea. We'll get it right this time." With Chelsea's endorsement in hand, Sarah returned to the office, where the team was already hard at work. The clock was ticking, and there was no room for delays. The video with Chelsea was shot quickly, and within hours, it was edited and ready to be released across all platforms. As Sarah watched the video come together, Chelsea speaking directly to the camera, her words honest and clear, she felt a sense of hope begin to rise. They were on the right track. The authenticity that Chelsea projected would resonate with Bloom's target demographic, showing that they had addressed the concerns and were moving forward with a stronger foundation. Simultaneously, Jake was coordinating the launch of the new influencer partnerships, ensuring that each influencer's content was aligned with the revamped message. Sophie had already scheduled the behind-the-scenes content, showing how they were making the changes in real time, offering an intimate look at the campaign's evolution. The team was firing on all cylinders, each member doing their part with precision. As the week continued, Sarah watched the numbers rise, the engagement, the positive comments, the increased reach. It wasn't going to be an instant fix, but they were getting there. They were making progress. By Thursday, just days before the deadline, Sarah found herself sitting across from Laura once again, in the same sleek conference room where she had first received the ultimatum. This time, however, the air felt different. There was still tension, but it was now mixed with a sense of cautious optimism. "Sarah," Laura began, her tone more neutral than it had been a week ago. "We've been tracking the changes to the campaign, and I'll admit, I'm seeing some promising results." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "I'm glad to hear that. We've been working tirelessly to turn things around." "I can see that," Laura replied. "We appreciate the effort. The video with Chelsea was a good move, and the new influencers are helping shift the narrative in a positive direction. We've also been seeing engagement pick up across social media. It's still early, but you've definitely made an impact." Sarah leaned forward, her resolve strengthening. "Thank you. I'm confident that we can continue to build on this momentum. We're not finished yet, but we're on track." Laura nodded. "You've got one more day, Sarah. But if the numbers keep trending this way, I think we'll be in a good place. You've earned more time." Sarah let out a breath she didn't even realize she'd been holding. The pressure wasn't over yet, but for the first time in a week, she felt like she had a shot at success. The last day of the week arrived, and Sarah was more focused than ever. She had spent the entire week in a whirlwind of strategy, planning, and execution. She had seen her team work tirelessly, and now, they were finally in the home stretch. One final push. One last effort to prove that the campaign could not only be salvaged but could thrive. Sarah sat in her office, reviewing the analytics on her laptop. The numbers had been climbing steadily since the release of the video with Chelsea. The new influencers were posting their content, and the behind-the-scenes footage had resonated with the audience. It was working. But it wasn't enough yet. She needed one final, impactful move to cement their success. She picked up her phone and called Jake. "Jake, where are we with the influencer posts for today?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We're on track, Sarah. Everything's lined up. We've got one final post ready to go from each of the new influencers. They're all really engaging with their followers, and the feedback's been overwhelmingly positive. We're definitely seeing the shift we wanted. Great, Sarah said, feeling a small sense of relief. Keep the momentum going. And make sure the team's ready for the live Q&A session at noon. Got it, Jake replied, his voice enthusiastic. We've got this. Sarah hung up and sat back in her chair, allowing herself a moment to breathe. But she knew there was no time to relax. There were still other details to manage, the timing of each influencer's post, the engagement on social media, and the final touch with Bloom Cosmetics. She glanced at the clock. It was almost noon. She grabbed her tablet and walked to the conference room where the live Q&A session would take place. This was their opportunity to directly address any lingering doubts from the public and show that they were fully invested in transparency and open communication. The team had set up the live session with Bloom Cosmetics followers, and as Sarah joined the video call, she was greeted by the faces of Jake, Sophie, and the rest of the team. Everyone looked ready. Everyone was eager. The session would be broadcast on all of Bloom's social media platforms, allowing fans and customers to ask questions directly. The pressure was high, but this was the perfect opportunity to solidify their redemption story. All right, everyone, let's do this, Sarah said, her voice steady. Stick to the plan, answer questions with honesty, and make sure we keep the tone positive. We're here to show how much we've grown and how we're committed to the brand and our customers. Sophie adjusted her camera and gave Sarah a thumbs up. Jake did the same. Everyone was ready. The Q&A began, and for the next hour, they fielded questions from customers, fans, and even influencers. Most of the questions revolved around the changes to the campaign and how they had responded to the controversies. Sarah was upfront with the audience, explaining the steps they had taken to address the issues, including the work they had done with Chelsea and the new influencer partnerships. The audience was surprisingly receptive. They appreciated the honesty, the transparency, and the effort to rebuild. As the questions continued, Sarah could feel the room's energy shift. This was more than just a Q&A, it was a demonstration of their commitment to their values, and it was making an impact. By the time the live session ended, Sarah felt a mixture of exhaustion and accomplishment. They had done it. They had answered the hard questions, showed the world their dedication to making things right, and reignited the campaign's potential. But she wasn't done yet. She still had one more important meeting. As soon as the live session was over, Sarah grabbed her phone and called Laura at Bloom Cosmetics. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she knew that she had to make the call. Laura, it's Sarah, she said as soon as the call was picked up. I just wanted to update you on the final steps we've taken. Go ahead, Laura's voice came through the line, calm but attentive. We've launched the final influencer posts, and the engagement is already through the roof. The feedback from the live Q&A was overwhelmingly positive. People are responding to the transparency, and we've seen a significant uptick in engagement across all platforms. We're not just addressing the concerns, we're showing growth, and we're demonstrating our commitment to the brand. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Sarah held her breath, waiting for Laura's response. That's good to hear, Laura said finally. I've been keeping an eye on the numbers as well, and I can see the improvement. The live session really seemed to resonate with people. I'll admit, I had my doubts earlier this week, but you've proven that you can handle a crisis and still deliver. Sarah exhaled, a wave of relief washing over her. Thank you, Laura. I'm confident that we've turned the corner. We'll keep pushing forward and ensure the momentum continues. Laura was silent for a moment before responding, we'll be in touch soon. But for now, it looks like you've bought us some time. Keep up the good work, Sarah. The call ended, and Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. They had made it. She had made it. It wasn't just a victory, it was a testament to her leadership, her resilience, and the power of her team. Later that evening, Sarah sat alone in her office, watching the final numbers for the day roll in. It wasn't just about the figures. It was about the fact that they had come together as a team, faced an impossible challenge, and turned things around. They had done it. The campaign was back on track. The public perception was shifting in their favor. And most importantly, Bloom Cosmetics had given her a second chance. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?